It's funny how a single wrong turn can reroute your entire understanding of reality. For me, that wrong turn wasn't literal, not at first. It was a choice, a decision to push a little further, to see what was around the next bend that took me straight into a nightmare I still can't shake. Even now, years later, the memory of that place, that impossible staircase, makes my skin crawl. I was 26, restless, and convinced I was invincible. I'd spent most of my adult life chasing forgotten places, an urban explorer with a camera and a thirst for stories etched in crumbling brick and rusted metal. I wasn't some thrill seeker looking for cheap scares. I saw myself as an amateur historian, documenting the slow decay of things man had built and then abandoned. My YouTube channel, Forgotten Footprints, had a modest but loyal following, enough to justify the gas money and the occasional new lens. This particular trip had taken me deep into the mountains of northern Arizona, a rugged, isolated stretch of land dotted with ghost towns and what locals vaguely referred to as old mining sites. My current obsession was the legend of the Black Canyon Mine, a place whispered about more than visited. It wasn't the gold that intrigued me, but the tales of a vast, unmapped complex, swallowed by the earth after a collapse decades ago, with only a few tantalizing structures remaining above ground. Access was notoriously difficult, requiring a permit for even basic hiking in the surrounding national forest and a serious off-road vehicle to navigate the washed-out trails. I'd managed to secure the permit, partly by sweet-talking a park ranger who seemed more amused than concerned by my solo expedition, and partly by exaggerating my experience. I told him I'd been exploring remote sites for years, which was true, but I glossed over the fact that most of those sites were abandoned factories within a 2-hour drive of civilization. This was different. This was remote. Cell service dropped out miles before I even reached the designated trailhead. It was just me, my old reliable Tacoma, a backpack crammed with gear, and the kind of solitude that sounds peaceful on paper but feels a lot heavier in practice. My plan was simple: hike in early, spend the day exploring the known ruins, and then set up a discreet camp near an old ranger station's foundations I'd seen on a topographical map. I'd be out by noon the next day. A quick in and out, enough for a solid video and some interesting photos. What could go wrong? I checked my supplies 3 times, told my sister vaguely where I was headed, enough for search and rescue, I hoped, and had a fully charged satellite messenger in case of absolute emergency. I wasn't reckless, not really, just a little overconfident. The hike in was brutal. The morning sun was already beating down, baking the red earth and making the air shimmer. The trail, what little there was of it, was overgrown with thorny scrub and loose rock. Every step was a careful calculation, and I found myself sweating through my bandana within the first hour. By the time I reached the main cluster of ruins, a skeletal headframe, a few collapsing shacks, and the gaping maw of what used to be the primary mine shaft, now sealed off by a rusty grate, I was already more tired than I'd anticipated. I spent a few hours documenting the surface structures. The usual stuff: rusted out machinery half buried in the dust, faded company logos on rotting wood, the ghostly outlines of lives lived and forgot. It was all fairly standard, atmospheric, but not particularly groundbreaking for my channel. I needed something more, something unique to the Black Canyon Mine, a reason to have come all this way. That's when I remembered an obscure mention in one of the old mining journals I'd found online. A superintendent's folly, it called it, an elaborate internal staircase leading to a high observation platform built not for practicality but for the superintendent's vanity, offering a commanding view of the entire operation. Most sources claimed it had been destroyed in the major collapse, but the journal hinted it might have been in a separate, more stable section, away from the main shaft. A long shot, but worth checking. I consulted my map, cross-referencing it with the crude sketch in the journal. It pointed to a ridge line slightly west of the main ruins, overlooking a deep ravine. The journal said it was accessible only by a difficult, winding path that was often washed out. Perfect. The harder to reach, the less likely others had found and vandalized it. I packed up my gear, making sure my primary camera was ready, and started my climb. The path was barely a goat track, clinging to the side of the ridge. Loose rocks skittered beneath my boots, sending small avalanches rumbling down into the ravine below. The sun was dipping lower now, casting long, dramatic shadows that warped the already strange landscape. I told myself to hurry, to get there, get my footage, and then find my camp before twilight. That was my first mistake, letting the fading light push me into taking risks. Just as the sun touched the distant horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, I rounded a final outcrop of rock. And there it was, not a folly, not quite. It was a ruin, yes, but a formidable one. A circular stone tower, surprisingly intact, rose about 30 feet from the cliff edge, partially swallowed by the encroaching desert. It looked like something out of an ancient European fortress, utterly out of place in the Arizona wilderness. And embedded within its crumbling walls, a dark, yawning archway. Through the archway I could see it, the spiral staircase. It was magnificent, a dizzying helix of rough-hewn stone winding upwards into the gloom of the tower. It looked old, impossibly old, not just decades but centuries. The stone steps were worn smooth in the center, testament to countless footsteps, though by whom I couldn't imagine. The air within the tower was immediately cooler still and held a faint, earthy smell like damp rock and forgotten time. My heart hammered with the kind of excitement only an explorer understands. This was it. This was the shot. This was the story. I pulled out my camera, already imagining the opening sequence for the video. Deep in the forgotten corners of Arizona, I'd narrate, lies a relic not of the American West, but of something far older, far stranger. I stepped across the threshold, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The silence inside was profound, broken only by the distant caw of a raven and the slow thud of my own pulse. The light from the setting sun, streaming through the archway, painted the lower steps in a rich, golden hue, but the upper reaches of the spiral were already lost to deepening twilight. I needed to move quickly if I wanted to capture it before true darkness fell. As I took my first tentative step onto the lowest stone, a strange sensation prickled the back of my neck. It wasn't fear, not yet. More like a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible hum, a vibration that resonated not just through the ancient stone, but through something deeper, something in my bones. It was the kind of feeling you'd get when you walk into a place that feels watched. Or perhaps more accurately, when you walk into a place that feels alive in a way it shouldn't be. I paused, camera halfway to my eye. The hum faded, or maybe I just imagined it. The silence returned, thick and absolute. I told myself it was just the isolation, the adrenaline, the echoes of old mining tunnels playing tricks on my tired brain. I shook my head, focused on the task. I took another step, then another, beginning my ascent. The stone felt solid, ancient beneath my feet. I counted them instinctively, a habit from years of navigating dark, unfamiliar spaces. 1, 2, 3. It was on the 7th step that I heard it, a soft, almost metallic click directly above me. It sounded like a mechanism engaging, a lock turning, or a small stone settling into place. I froze, my foot hovering over the eighth step. The sound was distinct, clear, and absolutely out of place in the still, silent tower. I looked up into the gathering gloom. Nothing, just the endless, winding spiral disappearing into the shadows. My breath hitched, my rational mind, the one I prided myself on, immediately started offering explanations. A bat, perhaps, a piece of the crumbling mortar giving way, the wind whistling through a crack in the stone. But there was no wind inside the tower. The air was perfectly still, and the sound, it wasn't a natural sound. It was too precise, too mechanical. I stood there for a long moment, listening, my ears straining against the absolute quiet. My camera felt heavy in my hand. The golden light from the archway had almost vanished now, leaving the lower steps in a dull gray and the upper ones in a deepening, ink-black darkness. A shiver, colder than the evening air, traced its way down my spine. Then, just as I was about to dismiss it, to tell myself I was being ridiculous, I glanced down. I had been on the seventh step. I was sure of it. I had counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But now, as my gaze drifted back to the base of the staircase, something was different. The lowest step, the very first one I had taken, the one leading up from the gravel floor, it looked lower. Not just an optical illusion of the fading light, but definitively, physically lower than it had been. And the gap between the gravel and that first step seemed wider. As if the entire staircase had subtly settled, sinking just a fraction of an inch deeper into the earth. But that wasn't what truly caught my attention. It was the step itself, or rather, the new one. There, just beneath what I knew was the first step, perfectly integrated with the ancient stone, was a new step. It was slightly rougher, a fraction lighter in color, as if freshly carved, but undeniably a part of the spiral, just below the original ground-level step. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I stared at it, unblinking, trying to force my brain to make sense of what I was seeing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then this new one below the first. It wasn't possible. I hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there. I would have noticed. My eyes had scanned the base of the tower when I entered. It was impossible. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the sudden, overwhelming silence. The subtle hum, the metallic click, the creeping shadows, they all converged, tightening around me. This wasn't a bat. This wasn't falling mortar. This wasn't an optical illusion. This was something else entirely, something fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. The sense of dread was immediate, profound, and utterly irrational. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, to get out of this place. But my feet, rooted to that seventh step, felt like they were encased in lead. My mind, usually so quick to rationalize, was blank, struggling to process the impossible image of that extra, newly formed step at the base of the ancient spiral. It was the first seed of true fear planted deep, and I knew with a horrifying certainty that my solo expedition had just taken a turn I was entirely unprepared for. The beautiful, ancient staircase I'd come to document had just shown me its first, impossible trick, and I was standing on it, and it had counted my steps. My mind reeled, grasping for purchase on anything solid, any sliver of logic that could explain the impossible. A new step, below the first. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again as if the act of blinking could reset reality. But it was still there, undeniably present, a raw, unsettling addition to the ancient structure. The rougher texture, the slightly lighter hue, like a fresh wound on old skin, it mocked my disbelief. "No," I whispered, the sound swallowed by the thick silence. It was a plea, a denial, a desperate attempt to talk myself out of the nightmare unfurling before me. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against the cage of my ribs. Every nerve ending screamed, "Run, get out now." But my feet remained rooted to the seventh step, heavy and unresponsive. The air, already still, now felt oppressive, thick with an unseen presence. I wanted to turn, to flee back through the archway and into the relative safety of the desert twilight, but a morbid fascination, mingled with sheer terror, held me captive. I had to know. I had to see if my eyes were truly deceiving me, if the isolation and fading light had finally pushed me over the edge into hallucination. Slowly, carefully, I lowered my right foot from the seventh step to the sixth. The stone felt cold beneath my boot, then my left foot followed. Each movement was deliberate, a test of the ground, a silent prayer that the impossible would retract itself. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I was back on the original ground-level step, the one I had first taken when I entered the tower. I knelt, my hands bracing against the rough stone of the first step, and leaned forward, peering down into the deepening gloom. Yes, my fingers brushed against the newly revealed step, feeling its granular surface, distinct from the smooth, worn stone above it. It was real, tangibly, terrifyingly real. It was a complete, perfectly formed step, descending into the gravel floor as if the entire staircase had simply dropped another rung into the earth. But that wasn't right. If it had dropped, the gap above the first step would have widened, not appeared below it. It was as if the staircase had birthed a new section. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead despite the chill of the tower. My breath hitched in my throat. This defied everything I knew, everything science taught. Stones didn't just manifest. Structures didn't spontaneously add new components. This was impossible. Yet there it was. I pulled out my phone, fumbling with my shaking hands, and switched on its flashlight. The beam cut through the dimness, stark and revealing. It illuminated the new step in harsh detail, highlighting its fresh-cut edges, its slightly lighter shade. It looked like it had been there forever, yet I knew with absolute certainty that it had not. My gaze flickered around the base of the tower. The archway was still there, a silhouette against the fading orange sky, but it seemed farther. Or maybe the shadows were just playing tricks on my overstressed mind. The gravel floor, which I remembered as flat and even, now seemed to slope subtly downwards towards the center, where the new step led. Okay, I breathed, forcing the word out, trying to regain some semblance of control. Okay, this is a trick, an illusion, some kind of optical effect caused by the specific light, the angle. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. The physical sensation of the new stone under my fingers was too concrete, too undeniable. I forced myself to be analytical, to be the urban explorer who meticulously documented every detail. I needed proof. I needed to record this. My primary camera was still clutched in my hand. I raised it, my thumb fumbling for the record button. The small red light blinked on, confirming it was filming. All right, I narrated, my voice a shaky whisper. This is crazy. I'm at the base of the spiral staircase. I just descended from what I counted as the seventh step, and now there's a new step here. I panned the camera down, capturing the undeniable evidence. You can see it. It's a slightly different color, rougher texture. It definitely wasn't here when I entered. It's as if the staircase grew. As I spoke, a profound unease settled over me. The very act of documenting it, of articulating the impossibility, made it more real, more terrifying. The air seemed to hum again, faintly, a low thrum that vibrated not in my ears but in my chest, a deep, resonant tremor. It felt like the stone itself was breathing. I hesitated, camera still rolling. My instincts screamed at me to bolt, but another, darker curiosity, the very drive that had led me to abandoned places my entire life, tugged me towards the unknown. If the staircase could add a step, what else could it do? Slowly, fighting every ounce of self-preservation, I placed my right foot onto the new, lowest step. It felt solid, perhaps even more solid than the ancient, worn steps above it. It was colder, too, as if drawing temperature from the deep earth. Glick. The sound was immediate, sharper this time, and directly beneath my foot. It wasn't a settling stone. It was a distinct metallic snap, like a hidden mechanism engaging. And then the ground shifted. It wasn't a violent jolt, not an earthquake. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible heave, a slow, deep sigh from the earth beneath my feet. The gravel around the base of the staircase stirred, tiny pebbles rolling and clicking, and then settled into a new, slightly lower configuration. My balance wavered for a moment, and I instinctively reached out, grabbing the rough stone of the first original step to steady myself. My eyes darted to the archway, my only escape. It seemed to recede further, the last vestiges of twilight outside now just a deep purple bruise on the horizon. The tower was plunging into darkness, the only illumination coming from my phone's frantic beam. And then I saw it. Where the archway had been, where the path outside had met the entrance to the tower, there was now a new structure. It wasn't a stone wall, not yet. It was more like a nascent membrane. A shimmering, semi-translucent film, the color of twilight haze, had stretched across the opening, sealing it. It pulsed faintly with a soft, internal light like bioluminescent algae obscuring the outside world. It wasn't solid, I could tell, but it was there. The way out was no longer clear. A panic, hot and immediate, surged through me. My rational mind, already battered, finally crumbled. This wasn't an illusion. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was real. This was impossible. This was a trap. I yanked my foot off the new step, stumbling backwards onto the gravel floor, my camera still recording, pointing uselessly at the ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. The membrane at the archway pulsed faster, as if in response to my terror. No, 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 no. I scrambled backwards, away from the new step, away from the shimmering barrier. My hands clawed at the air, searching for an escape that wasn't there. I spun around, my phone beam sweeping wildly, revealing only the rough stone walls of the circular tower, ascending into utter blackness. There were no windows, no other doors, just the endless spiral and the now sealed exit. I stumbled back against the wall, sliding down to sit on the cold gravel, my knees pulled to my chest. My heart felt like a trapped bird, beating itself to death against my ribs. The low hum in the air intensified, a steady, rhythmic throb that seemed to resonate deep within my skull. I looked at my phone, the screen still displaying the recording icon, the beam of light dancing erratically. I had to get out. I had to find a way. The staircase, it was the only way up, but also, it seemed, the only way deeper into whatever this nightmare was. My mind raced, trying to find a pattern, a rule. The first new step appeared after I reached the 7th step up. The second anomalous event, the closure of the entrance, happened after I stepped on the new lowest step. Was the staircase reacting to my movements? Was it alive? The idea was insane, utterly preposterous, but every impossible event pointed in that direction. This wasn't just old architecture. This was something else, something ancient, something aware. I had to try and go back. Maybe the membrane was permeable. Maybe if I just pushed through it, I could escape. Scrambling to my feet, I stumbled towards the archway. The membrane shimmered, reflecting the phone's light in distorted waves. It looked like solidified mist, a wall of ethereal vapor. I reached out a trembling hand, expecting to feel cold air or perhaps resistance. My fingers passed through it as if it were nothing but smoke. Relief, sharp and sudden, pierced through my fear. It wasn't a solid barrier. I could still get out. But as my hand moved further, I realized the horrifying truth. My fingers passed through the membrane, yes, but they did not emerge on the other side. They simply vanished into it. It wasn't just a visual trick. It was a boundary, absorbing whatever tried to cross it. It felt like sticking my hand into thick, cold mud, but without any physical sensation beyond a faint, buzzing numbness. I couldn't feel the air outside, couldn't feel the grit of the path. It was a void. I snatched my hand back, a strangled cry escaping my lips. The membrane pulsed with a subtle satisfaction. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a hungry, absorbing presence. Trapped, the word echoed in my mind, stark and terrifying. I was trapped inside this impossible tower with this impossible staircase. My rational brain, what little remained of it, kicked back in with a desperate surge. Okay, think, analyze, what's happening? The staircase added a step. Stepping on the lowest new step sealed the exit. Conclusion, the staircase reacts to my interaction with its lowest point. What about the upper steps? I remembered the metallic click from above when I was on the 7th step. Was that the staircase preparing for the new step to appear, or was it something else entirely? The only way was up. The idea filled me with dread, but there was no other option. I had to understand this place, or I would die here. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. I switched my camera back on. No, it was still recording. Good. I needed a record of this, even if it was just for my own sanity, even if no one would ever believe it. Okay, I said, my voice barely a croak. The exit is sealed. I can't go out. The only way is to ascend. I need to figure out what triggers these changes. I stood at the base of the staircase, the new step at the bottom, the original first step just above it. I decided to proceed cautiously, one step at a time, observing everything. I needed to mark my progress. I pulled a permanent marker from my backpack, a standard piece of gear for marking trails or abandoned locations, and with a grim determination knelt down. On the rough stone of the original first step, I drew a small, crude 1. Then, on the second, a 2. I continued upwards, making careful, deliberate marks on each step, counting them as I went. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I paused at the 7th step, the one where I had first felt the hum and heard the click. My heart thumped. This was the threshold. I marked it with a prominent 7. I took a moment, scanning the steps below. The new step at the bottom remained unmarked, a silent, menacing anomaly. With a surge of cold resolve, I took the 8th step. Nothing, no hum, no click, no shift, just the solid, ancient stone beneath my boot. I continued. 9, 10, 11, still nothing. The silence of the tower was absolute, broken only by my ragged breathing and the faint scratch of the marker as I numbered each step. The beam of my phone flashlight danced ahead, illuminating the next section of the spiral. The steps here were more worn, the stone gleaming faintly from centuries of friction. The air grew slightly colder, and a faint, earthy smell like damp earth and decaying leaves became more pronounced. I kept climbing, 20, 25, 30. The spiral seemed endless, winding upwards into the ever-present gloom. My legs began to ache, but the fear spurred me onward. I couldn't stop. I had to reach the top. What was at the top, the observation platform the journal mentioned, or something far worse? By the time I reached the 40th step, I was breathing heavily. My head was light, a combination of exertion and terror. 41, 42, 43. On the 44th step, I felt it. Not a sound, not a visual change, but a distinct pull in the air. A sudden drop in temperature, sharp and immediate, like walking into a cold storage unit. And then a sensation that made every hair on my body stand on end, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just a vague prickling. It was intense, focused, as if countless unseen eyes were fixed upon me from the darkness above. I froze, marker halfway to the stone. My phone beam trembled in my hand, sweeping frantically into the impenetrable shadows. Nothing. Just the smooth, featureless stone walls, the curving arch of the ceiling above, disappearing into an inky blackness that seemed to swallow the light. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. It sounded pathetically small in the vast, echoing silence. No answer, just the intensified feeling of scrutiny, a suffocating pressure. I forced myself to move, to continue marking. 44, 45, 46. And then on the 47th step, it happened again. Click. This time the sound came from above me, but not directly. It was distant, muffled, as if from many stories higher. It was the same precise, metallic sound I'd heard on the 7th step. My breath hitched. The staircase was counting again. I stared upwards, my phone beam struggling against the overwhelming darkness. My heart pounded with a frantic rhythm. What would happen this time? Would another step appear below me? Would the entrance open or another part of the tower seal? I looked down at the steps I had marked. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 47. I was counting the steps and the staircase was counting me. Slowly, carefully, I placed my foot on the 48th step. Nothing. I waited tense, my muscles coiled, ready to bolt. The hum in the air continued, a low, ominous vibration. The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing down on me. Then a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted down from the darkness above. It was a whisper, not a human voice, not exactly. It was more like the whisper of dry leaves skittering across stone or the rustle of ancient parchment. It was too indistinct to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a soft, sibilant hiss, laced with an ancient malevolence that chilled me to the bone. I stood there, paralyzed by a new kind of terror. This wasn't just a strange, active structure. It was something more, something sentient, something that had been waiting. I gripped my camera tighter, my knuckles white. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay here, suspended in the darkness, prey to the unseen whispers. The only way was up. I forced myself to take another step. 49, then 50. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, closer now, wrapping themselves around my ears, brushing against my sanity. They were meaningless, a cacophony of hisses and clicks, but they conveyed a clear message. You are not alone. You are watched. You are trespassing. My phone battery indicator flashed red. My heart leaped into my throat. No, not now. I needed the light. I needed the camera. This was my only link to sanity, my only way to document this impossible nightmare. No, 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 I mumbled, tapping the phone furiously as if that could magically replenish the power. The battery icon stubbornly remained red, a stark, menacing warning. The light beam flickered once, twice, then settled into a weak, sickly yellow glow. It was dying. Desperate, I rummaged through my backpack with my free hand, tearing through compartments. Where was my spare battery pack, my backup flashlight? I always had them, always. My fingers closed around the familiar shape of my small tactical flashlight. Thank God, I pulled it out, clicked it on. A blinding, focused beam burst forth, piercing the gloom with renewed vigor. Relief flooded through me, momentarily pushing back the encroaching terror. But the moment of respite was fleeting. As the powerful beam cut through the darkness, it illuminated something else, something far more horrifying than the whispers. Above me, stretching up into the blackness, the spiral staircase continued, but it was no longer just stone. Interspersed among the ancient, numbered steps starting just above the 51st step were new additions. Not stone steps, not like the one at the bottom. These were different. These were organic. They looked like rough, calcified growths, pale and bone-like, extending from the inner wall of the spiral, merging seamlessly with the original stone. They were not evenly spaced nor uniform in size. Some were shallow, almost like ledges, while others jutted out like misshapen teeth. They were clearly not part of the original construction. They looked grown. And they were covered in a thin, glistening sheen, like mucus or dew, reflecting the flashlight beam with an unholy glimmer. And on the surface of these growths, embedded within the pale, bony material, were faint, dark stains. Some looked like dried blood, others like smeared dirt, but one, larger and more distinct, caught my eye with a horrifying clarity. It was a splotch of dark, dried crimson, vaguely shaped like a human handprint, reaching up as if in a desperate, final grasp. My stomach churned. The earthy smell I'd noticed earlier now mixed with a coppery tang, faint but unmistakable. The whispers above seemed to coalesce, taking on a more defined, hungry quality. I recoiled, my foot slipping on the 51st stone step. I caught myself, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the grotesque growths above. This wasn't just a sentient staircase. This was something predatory, something that consumed, that grew, that assimilated. The handprint, the blood, it wasn't just old, it felt recent. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The whispers, the feeling of being watched, the clicks, they weren't just the staircase reacting to me. They were the staircase hunting, and I was the prey. I remembered the legend of the Black Canyon mine whispered about more than visited. The stories of a vast, unmapped complex swallowed by the earth after a collapse decades ago. What if the collapse wasn't natural? What if this tower, this impossible staircase, was the reason? What if it had been consuming people for decades, even centuries? My blood ran cold. I was no longer an urban explorer documenting a fascinating ruin. I was a rat in a maze, and the maze itself was alive, hungry. I had to keep moving. Staying here, frozen in terror, was an invitation for whatever created those calcified growths to come for me. But climbing further, stepping onto those grotesque, bone-like formations, it felt like walking into the mouth of a beast. I looked at my numbered steps below, 1 to 51, a grim tally of my journey into hell. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, almost forming into coherent, guttural sounds. I could almost hear my name in them, distorted and twisted. Liam, Liam. My tactical flashlight beam, strong as it was, seemed to struggle against the oppressive darkness higher up. The spiral continued, and I could dimly make out more of the grotesque, calcified steps extending further and further into the blackness, each one a testament to some unspeakable horror. I took a deep, shaky breath, the metallic taste of fear coating my tongue. I had two choices: descend back to the sealed entrance and wait for whatever was up here to come down, or keep climbing and face it head-on. The thought of being trapped in the dark, waiting, was unbearable. With a primal scream of defiance that felt tiny in the vast silence, I took a step onto the first calcified growth. It was slimy and cold under my boot, with a strange, spongy resistance that gave way slightly, like stepping on thick cartilage. A faint, sickening squelch echoed in the silence. My stomach lurched, threatening to betray me. I fought down the nausea, forcing myself to push forward. The next growth was larger, jagged, with sharper edges that threatened to tear my pants. I carefully navigated it, my hands brushing against the inner stone wall for balance. The stone itself felt subtly warmer here, almost feverish, and vibrated faintly with that deep, internal hum. I continued my ascent, each step an act of pure will. 52, 53, 54, I stopped counting the stone steps, focusing instead on navigating the gruesome additions. Each calcified growth was unique, a grotesque sculpture of organic horror. Some were smooth and slippery, others rough and porous, almost like petrified coral. The air grew heavier, thicker, and the smell of damp earth and copper grew stronger, now mingled with a faint, cloying sweetness, like decay mixed with something strangely floral. The whispers were a constant companion, a ceaseless murmur in the dark, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always unnerving. My phone, still recording, flickered again. The battery was dying despite my backup light. It wasn't just the light, I realized with a fresh wave of dread. The tower itself seemed to be draining power. My satellite messenger, tucked deep in my backpack, felt suddenly heavy and useless. Would it even work in here? I didn't want to test it yet. I needed it for a true emergency, an outside connection. But what if outside no longer truly existed? As I reached what felt like the 70th or 80th step, I had lost count of the original stone steps, the calcified additions blurring them together. The spiral began to narrow. The walls seemed to draw in, closing off the open central shaft. The darkness pressed in, becoming a physical weight. My flashlight beam, now the only source of light, revealed the intensifying horror. The calcified growths were no longer mere additions, they were dominating the staircase. They formed entire sections now, replacing stretches of stone with their gruesome, bone-like substance. Some sections looked like they had once been stone, but were now encased, consumed by the pale, organic material. The handprints and now other, smaller, less discernible stains were more frequent, more vivid. And then I saw it. It was partially embedded in the wall, just above a particularly large, jagged, calcified step. A boot. A hiking boot just like mine, or similar. Only this one was old, cracked, and partially covered in the same pale, bony growth that made up the steps. It was still laced, a few strands of faded red fabric clinging to the leather. It was clearly a human boot, half swallowed by the living stone of the staircase. A wave of nausea swept over me, stronger than before. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. Someone else had been here. Someone else had climbed this nightmare, and they hadn't made it out. They had become part of it. The whispers crescendoed, taking on a mocking tone, a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The air grew stifling, humid, and the strange, cloying sweetness intensified, making me gag. I stared at the boot, my blood running cold. This wasn't just a legend. This was a grave, and I was walking into it. Who are you? I stammered, my voice hoarse, directed at the unseen entity that controlled this place. The whispers answered, a rush of sound that was both intimate and impossibly vast, filling my head. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a torrent of images, feelings, and fragmented thoughts that assaulted my mind. I saw flashes of ancient rites, of dark earth, of blood-soaked stone. I saw faces, terrified and desperate, looking up at an endless spiral. I felt a profound hunger, an ancient, consuming need that had slept for centuries, now awakened. It was cold, patient, and utterly devoid of mercy. The images were so vivid, so overwhelming, that I clutched my head, groaning. It was like being slammed with 1,000 years of malevolence. This wasn't just a staircase. It was a nexus. A living, breathing, ancient entity rooted deep in the earth, feeding on trespassers, growing and expanding with each new victim. The superintendent's folly? No, this was something far older, far more terrible than any vanity project. This was a trap designed by something inhuman, something that had waited patiently in the dark, luring in the curious, the adventurous, the foolish, like me. My phone, still recording, finally died. The screen went black with a faint click. The last vestige of my connection to the outside world, to my rational self, was gone. I was alone, truly alone, in the suffocating darkness, illuminated only by my tactical flashlight. The boot, half consumed by the wall, seemed to glow faintly in the beam, a stark reminder of my fate if I failed. I took another deep breath, forcing myself to push past the horror. I couldn't afford to break down. Not now. I had to keep moving. Survival. That was the only goal. The staircase continued to narrow, the walls pressing in until the spiral was barely wider than my shoulders. The air was thick and heavy, each breath a struggle. The calcified growths were now the dominant form of the steps, the original stone almost entirely gone, consumed. The texture of the steps was uneven, some crumbling under my weight, others sickeningly soft. I was climbing slowly, steadily into the very belly of the beast. My flashlight beam became my entire world, a small circle of defiance against the overwhelming blackness. The whispers had faded slightly, replaced by a low, guttural rumble that permeated the entire structure, a sound that vibrated through the very soles of my boots, up my legs, and into my skull. It felt like the grinding of immense, ancient gears, or the slow, rhythmic digestion of something colossal. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only another half hour of agonizing ascent, I noticed a subtle change in the air. It became slightly less humid, a little cooler. The oppressive weight eased just a fraction. And then just ahead, the staircase abruptly ended. It didn't lead to a platform or an exit. It simply terminated halfway up the wall of what appeared to be a vast, cavernous chamber. The last calcified step jutted out into empty space, a horrifying precipice above an abyss of impenetrable darkness. My flashlight beam, struggling against the immense scale of the cavern, could not reach the far walls nor the ceiling. It was a void, echoing with the deep, rhythmic rumble of the living structure. The air was utterly still, cold, and silent, save for that omnipresent rumble. I stood on the very last step, a narrow, treacherous ledge of calcified bone, my back pressed against the curving stone of the tower's wall. Below me, the staircase plunged into absolute darkness, a twisting tunnel leading back down into the depths. Above, nothing, just the vast, empty, terrifying space. My flashlight beam found something directly opposite me, across the gaping chasm. It was a platform, not a small observation deck, but a massive circular platform at least 50 feet in diameter, seemingly suspended in the center of the cavern, level with my position. It was made of the same dark, ancient stone as the tower, but its surface was smooth, polished, and glowed faintly with an inner, phosphorescent light, illuminating intricate carvings etched into its surface. And on that platform, standing perfectly still, utterly silent, was a figure. It was tall, slender, and impossibly ancient. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its skin was like polished obsidian, reflecting the faint light in 1,000 tiny facets. It had no discernible facial features, just a smooth, featureless oval where a head should be. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in delicate, almost skeletal fingers. It wore no clothes, yet its form was devoid of any conventional musculature. It was simply a shape. A silhouette against the faint glow of the platform. It stood there, motionless, facing me. It had been waiting. My breath caught in my throat, my heart leaped, then plunged into my stomach. This was it, the source, the keeper, the thing that had orchestrated this nightmare. The rumble in the tower intensified, a deep, resonant growl. The air crackled with unseen energy. The entity on the platform began to move. It wasn't a walk, not truly. It was a glide, smooth and effortless, as if it were hovering just above the stone. It moved slowly, deliberately, towards the edge of the platform closest to me. As it drew closer, the faint light of the platform revealed more details. The carvings on the platform were not abstract designs. They were ancient symbols, pictograms, and what looked like crude, stylized representations of the spiral staircase itself, twisting and turning, sometimes with small, humanoid figures caught within its coils. And in the center of the platform, the carvings seemed to converge on a single, gaping maw, a circular depression that pulsed with the same faint, internal luminescence. The entity reached the edge of the platform. It paused, its featureless head tilted slightly as if observing me, assessing me. There was no sound, no breath, no indication of life, yet its presence was overwhelming. It radiated an aura of immense age, of cold power, of alien intelligence that had witnessed millennia. My legs trembled, threatening to give out. I was trapped on a crumbling ledge, staring across an abyss at a being that defied all understanding. And then its arm lifted. Slowly, gracefully, one of its spindly, obsidian arms extended, its skeletal fingers pointing directly at me across the vast, echoing space. There was no sound, but a force, cold and invisible, slammed into me. It wasn't a physical blow, but a mental one. A crushing weight descended upon my consciousness, filling my mind with a silent scream, 1,000 voices crying out in agony, and the overwhelming, undeniable truth, "You are mine." My vision blurred, the cavern spun. The last calcified step beneath my feet seemed to dissolve, crumbling into dust. I felt myself falling, plummeting into the abyss, my flashlight beam a useless, frantic star against the encroaching darkness. No, not like this. I wouldn't go down without a fight. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I lashed out, clawing at the non-existent air, trying to find purchase, anything to stop my fall. My fingers scraped against the rough stone of the tower wall, seeking a handhold. But there was nothing, only the cold, empty air and the sensation of falling, falling, falling. And then abruptly, the falling stopped. I wasn't at the bottom of the cavern. I was still on a step, a stone step. My eyes snapped open. The tactical flashlight, which I had somehow managed to hold onto, still shone, but dimly now, its beam weak and flickering. I was lying sprawled on a step, my head throbbing, my body aching. I pushed myself up, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Had I fallen? Had I blacked out? I looked around. The cavern was gone. The immense platform, the obsidian entity, the gaping abyss, all vanished. I was back in the narrow, winding spiral of the staircase. The walls were close, oppressive. The air was thick with the familiar smell of damp earth and decay. Above me, the steps continued their slow, nauseating ascent into darkness, some of them still calcified, some of them stone. Below me, the steps twisted downwards, equally lost in the gloom. I looked at the step I was on. It was stone, worn smooth. With a jolt of horror, I recognized the mark I had made. It was number 7. I was back on the 7th step. My stomach dropped. I stared at the faint 7 etched into the stone, then swept my flashlight beam down. Below it, the numbers were still there, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And at the very bottom, still there, was the new, rougher, unmarked step leading to the sealed archway, which now seemed impossibly far away, a shimmering, pulsating membrane against absolute blackness. I had been climbing for hours. I had navigated countless steps, both stone and organic. I had faced the entity, been pulled into a psychic vortex and fallen into an abyss, yet here I was, on the 7th step, again. My mind shattered. This wasn't just a physical trap, it was a temporal one, a spatial one. This staircase wasn't just growing, it was shifting, resetting, playing a game with my sanity. The whispers began again, soft at first, then growing louder, coiling around my ears, a chorus of sibilant sounds that no longer held meaning, but conveyed only a chilling, triumphant glee. The whispers were no longer just a sound. They were a presence, coiling around me like unseen tendrils, pressing in on my exhausted mind. They held a chilling, triumphant glee, a silent, guttural chorus that reverberated not in my ears, but in the very marrow of my bones. I was back on the 7th step. The faint 7 I had painstakingly marked still visible beneath my trembling fingers. It was a cruel joke, a cosmic slap across the face of my sanity. My tactical flashlight, now stubbornly dim, cast a weak, sickly yellow glow on the immediate steps, mocking me with its fading defiance. The cavern, the obsidian entity, the dizzying fall, had it all been a hallucination? A vivid, terror-induced dream brought on by dehydration and fear? My rational mind, fighting a losing battle, desperately clung to that explanation. But the searing pain in my temples, the lingering chill of that invisible force, the phantom taste of iron on my tongue, they argued against it. And the physical marks, the undeniable 7 on the step, confirmed that at least some parts of my nightmare were concrete, however impossible. I slowly pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, every joint aching as if I genuinely endured a brutal fall. My backpack, still miraculously on my back, felt like it weighed a ton. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat in my skull. I was disoriented, nauseous, and utterly, profoundly terrified. No, I rasped, the word a ragged expulsion of air. This isn't real. But it was. The stone beneath my hands, the rough texture of the wall against my cheek, the stagnant, earthy air thick with the faint scent of decay, it was all too real. And below me, leading to the shimmering, pulsating membrane that sealed my escape, was the new step. The rougher, slightly lighter stone, the one that had appeared when I first ascended, was still there, a mocking testament to the staircase's impossible reality. My eyes scanned the immediate area, desperately searching for any sign that my mind had simply conjured the horrors of the cavern. But the walls of the spiral were close, familiar, the same oppressive stone that had surrounded me moments before. No grand chasm, no suspended platform, no ancient alien watcher. Just the winding tunnel, the marked steps, and the impenetrable gloom above and below. A new, insidious form of despair began to settle in. This wasn't just a trap, it was a psychological torment. The staircase wasn't just eating people, it was playing with them, breaking them. It was a cat toying with a mouse, only the mouse knew it had already died once, only to wake up for a repeat performance. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I needed to move, I needed to do something. Staying put, letting the whispers and the impossible reality fester would only lead to a complete breakdown. But what could I do? Ascend again, relive that nightmare, descend and confront the sealed exit. My earlier attempt to push through the membrane had revealed it to be an absorbing void, not a simple barrier. I glanced down at the new, unmarked step at the very bottom, just above the gravel floor. It had appeared after I reached the 7th step up. Stepping on it had sealed the exit. Now I was back on the 7th step up again. Was there a cycle, a pattern I could discern? I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain some semblance of my analytical mind. The Liam who documented abandoned places, who prided himself on logic and observation. This wasn't an abandoned place, it was an actively malevolent entity. "Okay, Liam," I mumbled to myself, my voice hoarse and shaky. Think, what changed? What happened after I hit step 7 the first time? The metallic click from above, and then the appearance of the new step below. What happened after I hit step 47 the first time? The same metallic click from above, and the whispers intensified. Then the calcified steps appeared. It seemed the staircase reacted to specific numerical thresholds, and then reset me. A horrifying thought struck me. Was the fall, the cavern, the entity, was that the real reset mechanism? Did reaching the top, or what I perceived as the top, simply trigger a return to a specific starting point? If so, this wasn't just a trap. It was an eternal, inescapable loop. I felt a fresh wave of panic, stronger than before. This was worse than dying. This was an eternity of climbing, seeing the horrors, facing the entity, only to be deposited back on step 7, over and over again until my body gave out or my mind broke. No, I wouldn't accept that. There had to be a way out, there had to be. I looked at the number 7 on the step. It was so simple, so plain, yet it held such immense, horrifying power. This was my prison cell, my starting gate for endless torment. My tactical flashlight flickered again, a stark reminder of my dwindling resources. If the light died, I would be plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness with only the whispers for company. That couldn't happen. I forced myself to examine the walls again, more meticulously this time. Were there any hidden levers, any cracks, any faint glyphs I might have missed in my terror-stricken ascent? My beam swept over every inch of stone within my reach, but there was nothing. Just the seamless, ancient stone winding upwards. I had to try something different. What if the number of steps was the key? What if I had to avoid certain numbers, or maybe I had to step on them in a different order? But that was impossible on a spiral staircase. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic, desperate theories. What if the steps had changed in other ways? I reached down and felt the stone of the seventh step. Cold, smooth, worn, just as it had been. I moved my foot to the sixth, then the fifth, checking each one, feeling for any difference. Nothing. They were identical to how I remembered them. Except for one thing, my markings. I looked down at the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all clearly visible, etched into the stone. But what about the ones above? I raised my flashlight beam, my heart pounding. Higher up, where I had marked steps 8, 9, 10, and so on, the marks were gone, completely. The stone was smooth, pristine, as if I had never touched it with my marker. My breath hitched. Not only had the staircase reset me, it had erased my progress, my documentation. It was actively fighting my attempts to understand it, to map it. It wanted me lost, disoriented, without a guide. This realization brought with it a fresh wave of bone-deep horror. The staircase wasn't just alive, it was intelligent. It was toying with me, manipulating me, denying me even the small comfort of knowing how far I'd come. I slumped back against the cold stone wall, the futility of my situation crushing me. How could I escape something that defied the very laws of physics, that could reset time and erase memory from its very fabric? But then a spark, faint but persistent. If it erased my marks, then it knew I was marking them. It was aware of my attempts to understand its patterns. That meant there were patterns, and if there were patterns, there might be a way to break them. I couldn't rely on physical marks. I needed a different way to track my progress, something it couldn't erase. My mind raced. What did I have? My backpack. It contained my core gear, my water bottles, emergency food, a multi-tool, a first aid kit, a small, collapsible shovel. The shovel. It was a crazy idea born of desperation, but it was all I had. If I couldn't mark the steps, maybe I could alter them in a way that wouldn't be easily erased. With renewed, albeit grim, determination, I pulled the small shovel from its pouch. It was only about 18 inches long when assembled, but it was sturdy. I knelt on the seventh step, fighting the tremors in my hands. I couldn't risk the previous method of just going up. I had to understand the reset. Was it based on hitting certain steps, or how I hit them? Or was it the entity itself that pulled me back? I decided to try a different approach. Instead of rushing up, I would try to analyze each step, each change as meticulously as possible, and I would keep track of my true progress, not just the physical ascent. First, I had to confirm if the new step at the bottom, the one that sealed the archway, was still active in that capacity. If it was, touching it again might trigger a different, potentially worse, response. Or maybe, by some miracle, it would unseal the entrance. My tactical flashlight flickered again, a warning that time was running out. I couldn't dwell. I descended carefully, my eyes fixed on the steps. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I was back on the original first step, the one just above the newly appeared anomaly. I hesitated, hovering my foot over the new step. The air around it felt colder, almost drawing heat from my skin. The shimmering membrane at the archway pulsed faintly, as if anticipating my move. "Okay," I whispered, "test one." With a deep breath, I slowly, deliberately placed the tip of my boot onto the new, lowest step. Just the tip. Nothing, no click, no shudder. The membrane continued its slow, rhythmic pulse. I held my breath, waiting. A long minute passed, still nothing. Was it only when my full weight was on it, or had something changed with the reset? I shifted my weight, pressing harder onto the step. Click. It was softer this time, more of a faint thump from deep within the earth rather than a metallic snap. And the membrane at the archway pulsed faster, a ripple of intense light spreading across its surface, then receding. But it did not vanish. The entrance remained sealed. A wave of relief mixed with disappointment washed over me. It hadn't trapped me further, but it also hadn't opened. It seemed the staircase had recorded my previous action and simply acknowledged the attempt without repeating the initial effect. "Okay," I muttered, retracting my foot. "So the exit is still sealed, and the new step is still active but doesn't trigger a new sealing. Now to reascend, but differently. Instead of marking the steps, I would alter them. A small chip, a scratch, something it couldn't simply erase by resetting. I started again. Placing my full weight on the first original step, I used the edge of my shovel to carve a small, almost imperceptible notch into the side of the stone near the wall. It wasn't deep, just enough to be felt by touch. 1. I ascended to the second, making another small mark. 2. This was painstakingly slow. Each step was a deliberate act, a conscious defiance against the entity that sought to erase my progress. The hum in the air was a constant, low thrum like a sleeping giant's breath. The feeling of being watched intensified with each ascent, each scratch. It knew what I was doing. It was waiting. By the time I reached the sixth step, my hands were sore and my shoulders ached. My tactical flashlight was barely more than a glow stick now, its beam weak and flickering precariously. I was going to be plunged into darkness soon, and that terror was a constant companion, gnawing at my resolve. "Almost to 7, I whispered, forcing myself to focus. "Just past 7 last time the click happened." I made the mark on the sixth step. Then, with a surge of dread and anticipation, I stepped onto the seventh. Nothing. No hum, no click, no shift. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The whispers were quiet, expectant. I waited, my heart hammered against my ribs. I looked down at the scratched marks on the steps, then up into the gloom. Nothing. Was it a fluke? Was the 7 threshold gone? Or had my new approach, my careful, deliberate marking, changed its behavior? I decided to push to 8. I carved a notch, feeling the grit of the stone against the shovel's edge. 8. I took the step. Click. This time it was faint but unmistakable, and it came from below me. Not from the base of the staircase, but from deep within the earth, directly beneath the tower. A muffled, grinding sound like immense stone gears slowly turning. My blood ran cold. My tactical flashlight chose that moment to flicker erratically, its beam dimming to an almost useless glow. Panic clawed at my throat. I spun around, trying to make sense of the sound. It was coming from under the entire structure, not a new step appearing, not a ceiling, something far more fundamental was happening. And then the entire tower lurched. It wasn't a violent shake, but a slow, heavy tilt. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the stone, vibrating up my legs and into my chest. The very ground beneath me shifted, subtly, sickeningly. My balance wavered, and I instinctively grabbed the rough stone wall, digging my fingers into the mortar. Small pebbles, dust, and tiny fragments of rock rained down from the unseen ceiling high above, pattering around me. The air filled with the fine dust of ancient decay, making me cough. The tower was moving. It wasn't just growing, it was shifting. I clung to the wall, my eyes wide with terror, straining against the fading light. What was happening? Was it rotating? Was it descending? Was it pulling itself deeper into the earth? The groaning continued, a continuous, grinding sound that seemed to stretch on forever. The tilted sensation was disorienting, making my stomach churn. I felt like I was on a ship caught in a slow, powerful current. After what felt like an eternity, the movement ceased. The groaning faded into a low, steady hum, the one that had been a constant companion since I first entered. The dust slowly settled, but the air remained thick and heavy. I cautiously released my grip on the wall, testing my footing. The steps felt solid, but the feeling of disorientation remained. The tilt, if it had been a tilt, seemed to have been corrected, or perhaps I had simply adjusted to it. My flashlight, now a mere whisper of its former self, cast only a pathetic circle of light around my feet. I could barely see the steps ahead, let alone the ones below. What did that do? I whispered, my voice trembling. I looked at the notch I had carved on the 8th step. It was still there. My marks had not been erased this time, but the physical environment had been profoundly altered. I had to keep going. I couldn't stay suspended in this new, unknown configuration. My only choice was to ascend and hope to find some answers or, by some miracle, an escape. I continued to carve a small notch into each step, moving slowly, deliberately, counting my progress out loud to keep my sanity from fracturing completely. 9, 10, 11. With each step, the air seemed to grow colder, heavier, and the oppressive feeling of being watched returned with renewed intensity. The whispers, which had been momentarily silenced by the tower's movement, began again, soft and sibilant, just at the edge of hearing, like dry leaves skittering across distant stone. My flashlight beam, now desperately weak, was barely illuminating more than a single step at a time. The darkness pressed in, absolute and consuming, a physical entity in itself. I was moving by touch now, my hand brushing against the wall, my boot finding the next rise of stone. By the time I reached what I counted as the 20th step, my tactical flashlight gave a final, desperate flicker, then died. Absolute blackness. The darkness was immediate, total, and suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a physical weight pressing in on my eyeballs, filling my ears with a ringing silence, punctuated only by the relentless hum of the tower and the frantic thump of my own heart. Panic, raw and visceral, seized me. I gasped, fighting for air that suddenly felt thin and suffocating. My hands flailed out, slapping against the cold, smooth stone of the wall. I couldn't see. I was blind. The whispers, freed from the distraction of light, intensified, swirling around me, entering my mind directly. They were no longer indistinct. They coalesced, forming into a chilling, multi-voiced chorus that spoke in a language I couldn't comprehend, yet understood implicitly. It spoke of hunger, of ancient cycles, of consumption, of eternal entrapment. I sank to my knees, pressing my hands over my ears, desperate to block out the assault. But the whispers weren't in my ears, they were in my head, insidious and inescapable. Prey cycle feed forever. Tears streamed down my face, hot trails on my cold skin. I was going to die here, alone, blind, consumed. No, not yet. I still had my will. I still had my mind, however fractured. I fumbled in my backpack, my fingers scraping against fabric and metal. My spare battery pack for the phone. It was useless now. The phone was dead. My backup headlamp. Where was it? I always had a headlamp. My fingers closed around the familiar, compact form. Thank God. With shaking hands, I pulled it out, clipped it to my forehead, and fumbled for the switch. A burst of light, not as bright as my tactical flashlight had been at its peak, but glorious, brilliant, and utterly life-saving in the suffocating darkness. The narrow beam cut through the black, illuminating the immediate steps ahead. The whispers, momentarily shocked by the sudden light, receded, though they still hummed at the back of my mind. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself. The light was weak, but it was enough to move, enough to fight. I looked down at the step I was on, 20. I had made it to 20. My notches were still there. This time, the reset hadn't happened. My new method, perhaps, or had the tilt been the only consequence of crossing the 8 threshold? I pushed myself back up, legs trembling, and resumed my agonizing ascent. The headlamp beam bobbed with each step, creating dancing shadows that seemed to twist and writhe on the ancient stone. 21, 22, 23. I carved each notch a tiny act of defiance. The air grew progressively colder, and the familiar, sickening smell of damp earth and copper grew stronger, now mingled with that cloying sweetness like decaying flowers. The whispers returned, a constant, low murmur just outside the beam of my headlamp, always just out of sight, always waiting. I was beginning to feel a deep exhaustion, a profound weariness that settled into my bones. My body ached, my throat was raw from the dust and my desperate cries, and my mind felt like it was unraveling at the edges. How long had I been here? Hours, days, time had lost all meaning. As I approached what I estimated to be the 40th step, the nature of the staircase began to change again. Not a new step appearing, not a tilt, but something more insidious. The stone of the steps themselves began to show strange discoloration. Faint, dark veins, like capillaries under skin, appeared within the rock, spreading outwards from the inner wall. They pulsed with a faint, reddish glow, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. And then, just above the 40th step, the first of the calcified growths appeared again. My stomach dropped. I had hoped desperately that by changing my method, I might avoid the horrors of the organic steps, but here they were. Pale, bone-like, glistening with that repulsive, dew-like sheen. And as I shone my headlamp on the first of these new growths, I saw it, a faint, almost transparent shimmer around its edges. It was like heat haze or like looking through disturbed air. It wasn't solid, not yet. I reached out a trembling hand, pushing the beam forward. The shimmer intensified, dancing in the light. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I knew the staircase wasn't just growing, it was generating. It was forming the organic steps anew in real time. And this time it was doing it slowly, deliberately, showing me the process. The air around the shimmering growth grew even colder, and the faint, coppery tang intensified, now mixed with a sharp, metallic smell like ozone or fresh blood. The whispers around me coalesced into a frenzied chittering, a sound that conveyed a sickening excitement. I had to step on it, it was blocking the path. The stone steps abruptly ended, replaced by this nascent, still-forming horror. With a profound sense of dread, I placed my boot on the first of the shimmering growths. My foot sank slightly, not into soft flesh, but into something that felt like half-set concrete, gelatinous and cold. The shimmer intensified around my foot, and I felt a faint, buzzing numbness where my boot met the surface. It was absorbing the energy, the heat, the very essence of my touch. I quickly retracted my foot, a shudder running through me. The growth wobbled, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, solidified a fraction more, the shimmer fading slightly. It was growing stronger with my touch, my interaction. This was a new, horrifying layer to the trap. It wasn't just consuming the dead, it was using the living to manifest its own growth. I looked at the steps above, the headlamp beams struggling to pierce the gloom. More of the calcified growths were visible, still shimmering, still nascent. They were waiting for me to step on them, to solidify them, to bring them fully into being. I was building my own prison. My mind reeled. This was a psychological torture far beyond anything I could have imagined. Every step I took forward was an act of collaboration with the entity, a contribution to my own doom. But I still had to move. Staying put meant eventually succumbing to exhaustion, thirst, or whatever other horrors the tower held. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I couldn't afford to break, not now. I placed my foot back on the first nascent growth, pushing past the revulsion. It yielded slightly more this time, and the cold, buzzing numbness spread further up my leg. I quickly moved my other foot onto the next, then the next, traversing the section of forming steps as quickly as I could, trying to minimize my contact, my contribution. Each step was an agony. The squelch of the semi-solid material, the cold, buzzing sensation, the sight of the shimmering haze solidifying in my wake. It was like walking through a living, evolving organism. I didn't try to notch these steps. It felt pointless and repulsive. The whispers around me became a constant, excited murmur. The air grew stifling, humid, and the cloying sweetness intensified, making me gag. After navigating what felt like an endless sequence of these nascent, calcified steps, I finally reached a section of solid stone again. It was a relief, a small reprieve from the sickening organic material. But the stone here was different too. It was warmer, almost hot to the touch, and vibrated with a relentless internal hum, as if the very heart of the tower pulsed beneath its surface. And on these stone steps, the dark, reddish veins I had seen earlier were more pronounced, pulsing with a distinct, faint glow like distant embers. They writhed and branched, forming intricate, alien patterns across the stone. The headlamp beams, now weaker than ever, flickered with alarming frequency. My spare battery for the headlamp was also in my backpack, but I didn't want to open it and fumble around in this oppressive atmosphere. I needed to conserve. I continued to climb notch by painful notch. I had lost count of my original steps. I estimated I was nearing the end of my previous ascent, perhaps around the 75th or 80th mark. The spiral narrowed once more, the walls pressing in until the passage was barely wider than my shoulders. The air grew thick and heavy, each breath a struggle. The whispers, now a cacophony of sibilant sounds, seemed to emanate directly from the stone walls themselves, rising and falling in an ancient, hungry chant. And then, with a jolt of utter terror, I saw it. Partially embedded in the inner wall just ahead of me was the hiking boot. The same boot, old, cracked, partially covered in the pale, bony growth that made up the steps, the faded red laces. It was identical to the one I had seen before, the one that had solidified my worst fears. My stomach churned and I felt the bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a reset. This was a progression. I was following the same path, encountering the same horrors, only this time I was experiencing it differently, perhaps more intimately. The staircase wasn't just replaying the loop, it was evolving the experience. The whispers surrounding me intensified, taking on a mocking, almost gloating tone. It knew I had seen it before. It knew the impact it had on me. It was savoring my fear, my despair. I pushed past the nausea, forcing myself to reach out and touch the boot. The leather was cold, hard, and seamlessly integrated into the pale, bone-like growth that had consumed it. It felt like touching a fossil, a grim testament to a previous victim. A flash of images assaulted my mind again, sharper this time. Not the swirling chaos of before, but distinct, terrifying memories that felt alien yet familiar. A man much like myself, struggling upwards, headlamp beam dancing, desperation in his eyes. He stumbles, falls, reaches out, and then the pale, bony growth erupts from the wall, enveloping his boot, pulling him in slowly, inexorably into the living stone. His silent scream, his agonizing realization that he was becoming part of the structure, forever bound to its cold, hungry essence. I snatched my hand back, a strangled cry escaping my lips. This wasn't just a vision, it was a memory. The staircase was showing me the fate of the boot's owner, and implicitly it was showing me my fate. I was going to become part of this place. The headlamp flickered, then dimmed further, casting only a faint, reddish circle on the boot. The reddish veins in the stone pulsed with a sickening synchronicity with the throbbing pain in my temples. My vision swam. No, I choked out a defiant whisper. I won't become part of this. But what could I do? Every path led to this. Every ascent ended here, or at the platform, or wherever this nightmare was going to deposit me next. I pushed past the boot, forcing myself to continue, each step a testament to a desperate, fading hope. The staircase continued to narrow, the walls pressing in tighter and tighter. The air was thick and heavy, each breath a struggle. The calcified growths were now the dominant form of the steps, the original stone almost entirely gone, consumed by the pale organic material. The texture of the steps was uneven, some crumbling under my weight, others sickeningly soft. The guttural rumble that permeated the entire structure intensified, a monstrous digestive sound that vibrated through the very soles of my boots, up my legs, and into my skull. It felt like the grinding of immense, ancient gears or the slow, rhythmic digestion of something colossal. My headlamp, now barely more than a pilot light, was on its last gasp. The light was so dim I could only see the next step, the one beneath my foot. The rest was absolute blackness, pregnant with unseen horrors. After what felt like another eternity, I noticed a subtle change in the air. It became slightly less humid, a little cooler. The oppressive weight eased just a fraction. And then just ahead, the staircase abruptly ended. Again. It didn't lead to a platform or an exit. It simply terminated halfway up the wall of what appeared to be a vast, cavernous chamber. The last calcified step jutted out into empty space, a horrifying precipice above an abyss of impenetrable darkness. My headlamp beam, struggling against the immense scale of the cavern, could not reach the far walls nor the ceiling. It was a void, echoing with the deep, rhythmic rumble of the living structure. The air was utterly still, cold, and silent, save for that omnipresent rumble. I stood on the very last step, a narrow, treacherous ledge of calcified bone, my back pressed against the curving stone of the tower's wall. Below me, the staircase plunged into absolute darkness, a twisting tunnel leading back down into the depths. Above, nothing. Just the vast, empty, terrifying space. My headlamp beam found something directly opposite me, across the gaping chasm. It was the platform, not a small observation deck, but a massive, circular platform at least 50 feet in diameter, seemingly suspended in the center of the cavern, level with my position. It was made of the same dark, ancient stone as the tower, but its surface was smooth, polished, and glowed faintly with an inner, phosphorescent light, illuminating intricate carvings etched into its surface. And on that platform, standing perfectly still, utterly silent, was the figure. The same figure, tall, slender, impossibly ancient. Its form vaguely humanoid, its skin like polished obsidian, reflecting the faint light in 1,000 tiny facets. No discernible facial features, just a smooth, featureless oval where a head should be. Its limbs long and spindly, ending in delicate, almost skeletal fingers. It wore no clothes, yet its form was devoid of any conventional musculature. It was simply a shape, a silhouette against the faint glow of the platform. It stood there motionless, facing me. It had been waiting, again. My breath caught in my throat, my heart leaped, then plunged into my stomach. This was it, the source, the keeper, the thing that had orchestrated this nightmare, and I was back. The rumble in the tower intensified, a deep, resonant growl. The air crackled with unseen energy. The entity on the platform began to move. It wasn't a walk, not truly. It was a glide, smooth and effortless, as if it were hovering just above the stone. It moved slowly, deliberately, towards the edge of the platform closest to me. As it drew closer, the faint light of the platform revealed more details. The carvings on the platform were not abstract designs. They were ancient symbols, pictograms, and what looked like crude, stylized representations of the spiral staircase itself, twisting and turning, sometimes with small, humanoid figures caught within its coils. And in the center of the platform, the carvings seemed to converge on a single, gaping maw, a circular depression that pulsed with the same faint, internal luminescence. The entity reached the edge of the platform. It paused, its featureless head tilted slightly as if observing me, assessing me. There was no sound, no breath, no indication of life, yet its presence was overwhelming. It radiated an aura of immense age, of cold power, of alien intelligence that had witnessed millennia. My legs trembled, threatening to give out. I was trapped on a crumbling ledge, staring across an abyss at a being that defied all understanding. And then its arm lifted, Slowly, gracefully, one of its spindly obsidian arms extended, its skeletal fingers pointing directly at me across the vast, echoing space. There was no sound, but a force, cold and invisible, slammed into me. It wasn't a physical blow, but a mental one. A crushing weight descended upon my consciousness, filling my mind with a silent scream, a thousand voices crying out in agony, and the overwhelming, undeniable truth: you are mine. My vision blurred, the cavern spun. The last calcified step beneath my feet seemed to dissolve, crumbling into dust. I felt myself falling, plummeting into the abyss, my headlamp beam a useless, frantic star against the encroaching darkness. No, not like this. I wouldn't go down without a fight. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I lashed out, clawing at the non-existent air, trying to find purchase, anything to stop my fall. My fingers scraped against the rough stone of the tower wall, seeking a handhold. But there was nothing, only the cold, empty air and the sensation of falling, falling, falling. And then abruptly, the falling stopped. I wasn't at the bottom of the cavern. I was still on a step, a stone step. My eyes snapped open. The headlamp, which I had somehow managed to hold onto, still shone, but dimly now, its beam weak and flickering. I was lying sprawled on a step, my head throbbing, my body aching. I pushed myself up, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Had I fallen? Had I blacked out? I looked around. The cavern was gone. The immense platform, the obsidian entity, the gaping abyss, all vanished. I was back in the narrow, winding spiral of the staircase. The walls were close, oppressive. My headlamp, barely an ember of light, flickered, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching gloom. I was lying sprawled on a stone step, my body a battlefield of aches and pains, my mind a storm of fragmented terrors. The seventh step, again, the number 7, etched by my own hand just hours, or was it days ago, stared back at me, a cruel, mocking epitaph to my wasted efforts. The walls of the spiral were close, oppressive, the familiar smell of damp earth and decay filling my nostrils. The cavern, the vast chasm, the obsidian entity, the dizzying fall, all gone, replaced by this suffocating, endless spiral. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the chilling words in my mind: you are mine. I pushed myself up, groaning, every muscle screaming in protest. My headlamp was on its last gasp, casting only a pathetic, reddish glow on the immediate steps. The whispers, a soft, sibilant rustle, began to coil around me, insidious and triumphant. They weren't words, not in any language I knew, but they conveyed a chilling, palpable glee. They knew, they always knew. My hands, scraped raw from clawing at non-existent handholds in my illusory fall, trembled as I ran them over the stone of the 7th step. My etched mark. My small, desperate act of defiance against the staircase's erasing power. It was gone. The stone was smooth, pristine, as if I had never touched it with my shovel. Not a single scratch, not a single notch. My painstaking ascent, my meticulous mapping, my desperate attempt to leave an indelible trace, all erased. The staircase had not merely reset my position, it had reset itself, wiping away every alteration I had made, restoring its ancient, unblemished surface. A raw, primal scream tore from my throat, but it was swallowed by the thick air, a pathetic sound in the face of such absolute cosmic power. Despair, cold and crushing, descended upon me. This wasn't just a loop, it was an active, intelligent torment. It had allowed me to believe I was making progress, only to snatch it away, leaving me adrift in an ocean of futility. It was playing with me, savoring my struggle. Prey, helpless, mine. The The whispers seeped into my consciousness, no longer just at the edge of hearing, but directly in my thoughts, a cacophony of ancient voices rejoicing in my torment. My headlamp gave a final, desperate flicker, then died. Absolute blackness, total crushing. The whispers surged, a wave of triumphant malevolence. I squeezed my eyes shut as if that could block out the internal assault. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp in the suffocating dark. This was it. This was the end. I had fought, I had defied, and it had been for nothing. A profound, soul-deep weariness settled over me. What was the point? To climb again, to face the horrors again, to be reset again? My mind, stretched to its breaking point, simply could not endure it. I slumped against the cold, unyielding stone, letting the darkness consume me, letting the whispers wash over me, numb to their torment. I closed my eyes, seeking oblivion. But oblivion did not come. Instead, a new sensation pierced through my despair. A cold, damp chill seeping into my skin through my clothes. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of stagnant water and something else, something sweet and decaying, yet oddly floral. It was the smell I had encountered during my previous ascent near the calcified growths, only now it was overwhelming, suffocating. And then a sound, not the whispers, not the hum, but a faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. My eyes snapped open, though I could see nothing in the absolute blackness. My ears strained, trying to locate the source. It was close, very close. Drip, drip, drip. A panic, rekindled despite my weariness, began to claw at me. This was different. This wasn't the same. The reset had happened, but something new was occurring. I fumbled frantically in my backpack, my fingers scraping against familiar objects. My backup headlamp was dead. My phone was dead. My satellite messenger was useless here. But I had one more emergency light source, a small chemical light stick for true emergencies. This was a true emergency. With trembling hands, I snapped the light stick. A faint, greenish glow diffused through the immediate darkness, weakly illuminating the steps around me. It was barely enough to see, but it was enough to pierce the absolute blackness. And what it revealed sent a fresh wave of ice-cold terror through me. I was still on the 7th step. The 7 was gone. The steps were pristine, but the walls had changed. They were no longer uniform, ancient stone. The inner wall, the one I had pressed my back against, was now slick with a dark, glistening slime. And embedded within this slime, slowly pulsing with a faint internal luminescence, were hundreds, perhaps thousands of tiny, translucent sacs. They were ovular, gelatinous, and each one held a dark, irregular mass within. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was coming from these sacs, a steady, sickening cadence as drops of the viscous fluid fell onto the steps below, creating small, glistening puddles that reflected the eerie green light. My stomach lurched, threatening to betray me. This wasn't just a staircase, it was a hive, a nest. Something was breeding here, and the sweet, cloying smell was the scent of its progeny. The whispers intensified, but this time they were different. Less a chorus of ancient malice, more a low, hungry chittering, a restless, expectant murmur like insects in a disturbed nest. I recoiled, scrambling backwards until my head hit the opposite wall. The stone there felt subtly different too, rougher, almost fibrous. The very fabric of the tower was transforming around me. This wasn't just a reset, this was an evolution. The staircase was not just looping, it was learning, it was adapting. It was using my previous attempts, my vulnerabilities, to refine its trap, to make it even more terrifying, more inescapable. What was in those sacks? What horrors were incubating in the walls of my prison? A chilling thought struck me. The red veins I had seen in the stone during my last ascent, were they the nascent stages of these sacks? Was the tower's internal biology now closer to the surface, more overtly hostile? I had to get away from these things. I couldn't stay here, surrounded by whatever grotesque life was forming in the walls. My green light stick cast a sickly hue on the slime-covered wall, revealing a faint, almost imperceptible pulsation beneath the surface. The entire structure was alive, throbbing with an unseen, horrifying life. I forced myself to stand, my legs still trembling. Ascend, descend, what difference did it make? The only certainty was that I had to keep moving. Stagnation was death, or worse, assimilation. I looked down the spiral, the green glow fading quickly into impenetrable blackness. The new step at the bottom, the one that sealed the entrance, was probably still there. Descending felt like a retreat, an admission of defeat. And what if the sack-covered walls extended all the way down? I turned my gaze upwards. The green light struggled, but I could vaguely make out the steps continuing their ascent into the gloom. The inner wall, as far as I could see, was also covered in the pulsating sacks. Every path led into the belly of the beast. I took a deep, shuddering breath. "All right, Liam," I mumbled, my voice raw. "New games, no more markings, no more fighting the reset, just survive, try to understand." I started to climb. Each step was an act of pure will, a forced suppression of the nausea and terror that threatened to overwhelm me. The drips from the sacks splattered onto the steps, creating slimy, treacherous patches. I had to pick my footing carefully, avoiding the slick spots. The air grew heavier, the floral decay smell more intense. The whispers, the chittering, grew louder, a constant, irritating hum at the edge of my hearing, like a swarm of unseen insects buzzing around my head. One step, 2 steps, 3, I didn't count them aloud this time. What was the point? The numbers were an illusion, a tool of my tormentor. I simply moved. As I ascended past what I estimated to be the 20th step, the sacks became more prominent, growing in size, their internal dark masses shifting and writhing. The drips became more frequent, heavier. The sound of hundreds of tiny, embryonic heartbeats seemed to fill the air, a grotesque symphony of nascent life. My green light stick was already dimming, its chemical fuel quickly depleting. It was a temporary reprieve, a fleeting comfort. Soon, I would be plunged into total darkness again, this time surrounded by the grotesque, pulsating womb of the tower. I forced myself to focus, to observe what was different this time. The tilt hadn't happened yet, the metallic click from below hadn't sounded. Had the thresholds changed, or was the entire nature of the staircase different now? The sickening sweet smell of the sacks grew so intense it made my eyes water. The chittering whispers seemed to be directly responsive to my presence, intensifying as I moved, receding slightly when I paused. It was watching. It was reacting. I reached out a hesitant hand to the inner wall near one of the larger sacks. The slime was cold, viscous, and seemed to cling to my skin. The sack itself felt oddly warm, almost feverish, and vibrated with a faint internal pulsation. I could almost feel the life writhing within it. Suddenly, the sack closest to my hand split. It didn't burst or pop. It slowly, sickeningly peeled open from the top like a flower unfurling in reverse. A thin, clear fluid, thick as sap, oozed out, coating the wall and dripping onto the step below. And from within, slowly, deliberately, a grotesque form began to emerge. It was small, no larger than my hand, but utterly alien. A pale, chitinous shell, a mass of tiny, wriggling appendages, and a cluster of black, unblinking eyes. It was like a monstrous insect larva, yet it had a disturbingly humanoid quality, a distorted resemblance to a miniature, newborn humanoid infant. It squirmed on the wall, its tiny appendages scrabbling at the slime, its black eyes fixing on me with an unsettling intelligence. A faint, high-pitched keening sound, almost inaudible, escaped its grotesque mouth. My blood ran cold. This was what was inside the sacks. This was the tower's offspring. The whispers around me turned into a frenzied, triumphant chorus. The other sacks along the wall began to pulse faster, some of them subtly expanding, as if awakened by the emergence of their sibling. I stumbled back, my foot slipping on the viscous fluid. I almost fell. The creature on the wall, sensing my distress, began to scuttle towards me, its tiny, multi-jointed legs making a dry, clicking sound against the stone. "No!" I screamed, a raw, desperate sound. I kicked out instinctively, my boot connecting with the fragile chitin of the creature. It let out a piercing shriek, a sound that grated on my nerves and tumbled from the wall, landing with a wet splat on a lower step. I didn't wait to see if it was dead. I scrambled upwards, ignoring the slime, ignoring the fear, pushing myself to move faster than I thought possible. The chittering behind me intensified, now mixed with the high-pitched keening of the wounded creature and the subtle, rhythmic snapping of other sacks beginning to open. The tower was birthing its children, and they were coming for me. The green light stick was almost useless now, casting only a faint halo around my head. I could barely see the steps, relying on touch and instinct. My hands, sliding along the outer wall, felt the rough stone, the occasional slick patch of errant slime. My breath came in ragged gasps. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. I could hear them now, the soft, scuttling sounds of multiple creatures on the steps below me making their way up. I pushed on higher and higher, my muscles screaming in protest. The air grew thicker, heavier, saturated with the repugnant sweet decay smell. The whispers, the chittering, the keening, it was a symphony of alien horror. Suddenly the ground beneath me shifted. It wasn't a tilt this time. It was a subtle, shuddering vibration, a deep, resonant rumble that started beneath my feet and traveled up through the entire structure. The walls groaned, a sound of immense, ancient stone grinding against itself. And then, abruptly, the entire spiral section of the staircase rotated. Not a tilt, but a full, slow, deliberate turn, like a giant, unseen mechanism had engaged. The outer wall, which had been on my left, slowly, sickeningly, began to move to my right, carrying me with it. The inner wall, with its pulsating sacks and emerging horrors, rotated away, disappearing into the darkness behind me, then slowly, terrifyingly, began to reappear on my left. I stumbled, completely disoriented, clutching at the wall for support. My vision, already poor in the dim green light, spun violently. The rotation was slow, inexorable, and utterly disorienting. It felt like my very sense of balance was being ripped away. The chittering chorus intensified, a wave of triumphant sound that crashed over me. They knew. The creatures, the staircase, the entity, they were toying with me, manipulating the very fabric of my reality. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, the rotation ceased. The hum of the tower, which had intensified during the movement, settled back into its rhythmic thrum. The grinding sounds faded. I clung to the wall, gasping for breath, my stomach churning. I was profoundly disoriented. Where was I now? Had I rotated 90 degrees, 180, or a full 360, only to be deposited back in the same relative position, but with a new sense of spatial horror? My green light stick, now a pathetic dying ember, cast its last, faint glow on the steps immediately around me. I tried to look down to see the sack-covered wall, but the darkness was too profound. I could only hear the faint, scuttling sounds, slowly, inexorably, drawing closer from below. I had to keep going. I couldn't let them reach me. I forced myself to move one agonizing step at a time. The air grew colder. The oppressive weight eased just a fraction. And then just ahead, the staircase abruptly ended. Again. It didn't lead to a platform or an exit. It simply terminated, halfway up the wall of what appeared to be a vast, cavernous chamber. The last calcified step jutted out into empty space, a horrifying precipice above an abyss of impenetrable darkness. This time the step felt rougher, almost like petrified coral, as if my earlier steps had solidified it further. My green light stick, now a truly useless, faint glow around my fingers, could not pierce the immense scale of the cavern. It was a void, echoing with the deep, rhythmic rumble of the living structure. The air was utterly still, cold, and silent, save for that omnipresent rumble. I stood on the very last step, a narrow, treacherous ledge of calcified bone, my back pressed against the curving stone of the tower's wall. Below me, the staircase plunged into absolute darkness, a twisting tunnel leading back down into the depths and towards the scuttling, chittering horrors. Above, nothing, just the vast, empty, terrifying space. My dying light stick, held out with a trembling hand, found something directly opposite me, across the gaping chasm. It was the platform, the same platform, massive, circular, suspended in the center of the cavern, level with my position. Made of the same dark, ancient stone as the tower, its surface smooth, polished, and glowing faintly with an inner, phosphorescent light illuminating intricate carvings etched into its surface. And on that platform, standing perfectly still, utterly silent, was the figure. The same figure, tall, slender, impossibly ancient. Its form vaguely humanoid, its skin like polished obsidian, reflecting the faint light in 1,000 tiny facets. No discernible facial features, just a smooth, featureless oval where a head should be. Its limbs long and spindly, ending in delicate, almost skeletal fingers. It wore no clothes, yet its form was devoid of any conventional musculature. It was simply a shape, a silhouette against the faint glow of the platform. It stood there motionless, facing me. It had been waiting, again. But this time it was different. As the last flicker of green light faded from my hand, plunging me into absolute darkness, the entity on the platform seemed to brighten. Its obsidian form, previously merely reflecting the faint glow of the platform, now began to radiate its own light. A deep violet luminescence emanating from within its polished surface, casting long, wavering shadows across the cavern. And from its featureless head, from where its eyes should have been, two pinpricks of intense, burning violet light began to glow. Like distant stars, cold and ancient, they fixed on me across the chasm. My breath caught in my throat, my heart leaped, then plunged into my stomach. This was it, the source, the keeper, the thing that had orchestrated this nightmare, and now it was looking at me, truly looking at me with its own light. The rumble in the tower intensified, a deep, resonant growl. The air crackled with unseen energy, and a faint, acrid smell like burnt copper permeated the cavern. The entity on the platform began to move. It wasn't a walk, not truly. It was a glide, smooth and effortless, as if it were hovering just above the stone. It moved slowly, deliberately, towards the edge of the platform closest to me. Its violet eyes burned, unwavering, fixed on my position. As it drew closer, the faint light of the platform, augmented by the entity's own glow, revealed more details. The carvings on the platform were not abstract designs. They were ancient symbols, pictograms, and what looked like crude, stylized representations of the spiral staircase itself, twisting and turning, sometimes with small, humanoid figures caught within its coils. And in the center of the platform, the carvings seemed to converge on a single, gaping maw, a circular depression that pulsed with the same faint, internal luminescence. But now, as the entity approached, the figures in the carvings seemed to move. Not literally, but the play of light and shadow, the way the violet glow interacted with the ancient etchings, gave them a horrifying, animated quality. The humanoid figures struggled, their faces contorted in silent screams, their limbs entangled in the coils of the staircase. They were not just carvings, they were depictions of its past victims, trapped forever in its eternal cycle. The entity reached the edge of the platform. It paused, its featureless head tilted slightly as if observing me, assessing me. There was no sound, no breath, no indication of life, yet its presence was overwhelming. It radiated an aura of immense age, of cold power, of alien intelligence that had witnessed millennia. And now, with its own light, it was more terrifying than ever. The violet glow pulsed with an inner malevolence. My legs trembled, threatening to give out. I was trapped on a crumbling ledge, staring across an abyss at a being that defied all understanding. And then its arm lifted. Slowly, gracefully, one of its spindly, obsidian arms extended, its skeletal fingers, now tipped with small, pulsing violet orbs, pointing directly at me across the vast, echoing space. There was no sound, but a force, cold and invisible, slammed into me. It wasn't a physical blow, but a mental one. A crushing weight descended upon my consciousness, filling my mind with a silent scream, 1,000 voices crying out in agony. And the overwhelming, undeniable truth, colder and sharper than before: you are mine, you are ours, and you will feed us all. My vision blurred, the cavern spun. The last calcified step beneath my feet seemed to dissolve, crumbling into dust. I felt myself falling, plummeting into the abyss, the entity's violet eyes burning like twin suns above me, growing smaller and smaller until they were swallowed by the encroaching darkness. No, not like this. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Again. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I lashed out, clawing at the non-existent air, trying to find purchase, anything to stop my fall. My fingers scraped against the rough stone of the tower wall, seeking a handhold. But there was nothing, only the cold, empty air and the sensation of falling, falling, falling. And then abruptly, the falling stopped. I wasn't at the bottom of the cavern. I was still on a step, a stone step. My eyes snapped open. The green light stick, which I had somehow managed to hold onto, was completely dead, a useless plastic tube in my hand. I was lying sprawled on a step, my head throbbing, my body aching. I pushed myself up, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Had I fallen? Had I blacked out? I looked around. The cavern was gone. The immense platform, the obsidian entity, the gaping abyss, all vanished. I was back in the narrow, winding spiral of the staircase. The walls were close, oppressive. The familiar scent of damp earth and decay was back, but now, overriding it, was that sickeningly sweet, floral decay smell, thick and pervasive. And the whispers, they were back too, a low, guttural chittering, a restless hum emanating from the walls themselves. I reached out, my hand brushing against the inner wall. It was slick with slime, and embedded within the slime, slowly pulsing, were the myriad translucent sacs, each holding a dark, writhing mass. I was back on the 7th step, but this time the sacs were already here. They hadn't appeared later in the ascent. They were waiting. They were everywhere. A new, profound horror settled upon me. The cycle was intensifying. Each reset brought a new, more terrifying iteration of the staircase. The entity was learning, adapting, making the trap tighter, the torment deeper. My breathing grew ragged, my light was gone. I was blind, surrounded by nascent horrors, trapped in a loop that grew progressively worse. My previous methods had failed. My physical endurance was waning. My mental fortitude was shattering. What was left? What could I possibly do? I fumbled again in my backpack, my hands shaking. I needed light, anything. My tactical flashlight was gone. My headlamp was gone. The chemical light stick was dead. My fingers brushed against something hard, metallic, and strangely familiar. My multi-tool, a heavy-duty camping knife. And then, deep within a side pocket, almost forgotten, my last resort, my emergency flare, a single, small, highly volatile marine signal flare. It was meant for open water, a desperate cry for help that would burn for a short, intense period. It was dangerous in an enclosed space, but this wasn't an enclosed space. This was hell. I pulled it out, a small, red, cylindrical object. It felt like a stone, solid and real in a world of shifting illusions. It wouldn't last long, maybe a minute, 2 at most, but it would be bright, blindingly bright. And if I was going to be consumed, if I was going to become part of this living, breathing prison, I would go out with a flash. I would see my tormentor, truly see it, before the end. But what if I could use the intensity of the light, the sudden shock, to disrupt the entity, to break the cycle? It was a desperate, foolish thought born of utter desperation. But it was a thought. I slowly stood, my back pressed against the slime-covered, sack-filled wall. The chittering whispers intensified, sensing my awakening, sensing my intent. I held the flare in one hand, my thumb hovering over the igniter. My other hand gripped the hilt of my camping knife, a cold, hard comfort against my sweating palm. I knew with a chilling certainty that this would be my last ascent, my last chance. Whatever happened next, it would be definitive, either escape or final assimilation. I had to choose, fight or succumb. My mind, though fractured, still clung to a single burning ember of defiance. I was Liam. I was an explorer. I was not Emil. With a guttural roar that echoed eerily in the oppressive silence, I pressed the igniter on the flare. A blinding, searing white light erupted from the flare, illuminating the spiral staircase in an incandescent burst. The darkness recoiled violently. The walls, slick with slime and covered in pulsing sacs, were revealed in stark, horrifying detail. The emerging insectal creatures, startled by the sudden inferno, recoiled, some shrieking, others scuttling away. The chittering whispers, which had been so confident, so triumphant, were replaced by a deafening, piercing shriek of pure agony. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of something vast, ancient, and utterly alien, writhing in pain. The entire tower shuddered violently, a profound, gut-wrenching tremor that threatened to tear it apart. Dust and pebbles rained down in torrents, stinging my face. I staggered, holding the flare aloft, its light burning so intensely that it seared my eyes, even through tightly squinted lids. The heat radiating from it was immense, oppressive, but it was a heat of my own making, a weapon against the oppressive cold of the tower. The sacks along the inner wall closest to me began to shrivel, to blacken, to pop with sickening wet sounds, their grotesque contents sputtering and burning in the intense light. The slime sizzled and smoked. The entity, the staircase, was vulnerable to light, not just any light, but intense, disruptive light. This was my chance, my only chance. I started to climb, the flare held high, its blinding light cutting a swath of destruction through the nightmare. The shrill cries of the tower intensified, a furious, desperate sound. The entire structure was writhing, groaning, resisting the assault. I kicked away the shriveling remains of sacks, stepping over the charred, burning fragments of the insectal creatures. The path was suddenly, miraculously, clearer. The new, organic steps ahead of me, which had formed during my previous ascent, were now shriveling and turning to ash in the flare's intense heat. The stone beneath them was revealed, ancient and scarred, but solid. I scrambled upwards, fueled by a renewed surge of adrenaline and a desperate, burning hope. This was it. This was the opening. I didn't care about counting steps. I didn't care about the pain. I just climbed higher and higher, the flare a blazing beacon of defiance in the heart of the beast. The air grew thick with acrid smoke and the stench of burnt organic matter. The screams of the tower continued, a constant, agonizing shriek that grated on my very soul. It was fighting back, twisting, trying to shake me loose, but I clung on, my fingers raw, my boots finding purchase on the crumbling, smoking steps. The spiral narrowed again, the walls pressed in. But this time, instead of pulsating sacs and encroaching organic growth, I saw only shriveling, smoking remnants. The flare was burning them away. I reached what I estimated to be the last section of the spiral. The flare was already dimming, its powerful burst quickly fading. I could feel the heat diminishing, the light starting to wane. Time was running out. Then just ahead I saw it, the boot. The hiking boot half consumed by the wall. But now it too was smoking, sizzling, the pale, bony growth around it blackening and cracking. The illusion of the memory, the vision of the previous victim being consumed, flickered and faded in the raw, blinding light of the flare. This wasn't a memory the staircase was showing me, it was a projection, a mind trap, and I was burning through it. I pushed past it, not bothering to touch it. There was no time, the end was near. The air grew colder, less humid. The oppressive weight eased. And then, for the third time, the staircase abruptly ended. It didn't lead to a platform or an exit. It simply terminated, halfway up the wall of what appeared to be a vast, cavernous chamber. The last step, calcified and crumbling, jutted out into empty space, a horrifying precipice above an abyss of impenetrable darkness. But this time, the flare, despite its fading power, cast a desperate, flickering light across the chasm. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was here again, but this time I had a weapon. My flare, now sputtering and dim, barely illuminated the immediate area, but it was enough. Enough to see the massive, circular platform suspended in the center of the cavern, level with my position. Its surface still glowed with that faint inner luminescence, revealing the intricate carvings. And on that platform, standing perfectly still, utterly silent, was the figure. The obsidian entity. But it was different. Its violet glow was gone. Its form, previously so regal and imposing, seemed to shimmer, to waver, as if its very existence was being challenged. The polished obsidian surface was duller, almost rough, and along its spindly limbs, faint hairline cracks were visible, radiating outwards like fractured glass. Its featureless head was tilted, not in observation, but in what seemed to be a silent, profound anguish. The intense shriek of the tower had died down to a low, painful moan, a deep, wounded rumble that permeated the cavern. The air still smelled of ozone and burnt matter. I held the sputtering flare aloft, pointing its last, dying light directly at the entity. Its form rippled, distorting like heat haze. It began to move slowly, haltingly, towards the edge of the platform. But this time there was no grace, no effortless glide. Its movements were jerky, almost pained. It seemed to be struggling, as if the very act of moving was an immense effort. It reached the edge of the platform, its cracked form shimmering violently in the flare's rapidly fading light. Its arm lifted, slowly, shakily, its skeletal fingers pointing at me, but the violet orbs were gone, replaced by dull, chipped obsidian. There was no sound, no psychic assault, only a faint, almost desperate whisper, resonating not in my mind, but in the very air around me. A single guttural word filled with ancient rage and profound, unexpected fear. Fool. And then with a final, desperate hiss, the flare died. Absolute blackness, total crushing. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the low, pained moan of the tower and the frantic thump of my own heart. I was blind again, weaponless again, but something had changed. The entity's rage was replaced by pain, its confidence by fear. I stood there, suspended on the precipice, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. The darkness was suffocating, but it was no longer absolute. There was still a faint inner glow emanating from the platform, a distant, phosphorescent light that outlined the struggling, wounded form of the entity. It was still there, but it was hurt, vulnerable. I had broken something. A new, terrifying thought dawned on me. If I could hurt it, could I destroy it? And if I destroyed it, what would happen to the staircase, to me? I gripped the hilt of my camping knife, its cold metal a grounding presence in the darkness. I had made it here, I had faced it, and I had wounded it. Now I had to find a way across. The faint glow of the platform, even from across the chasm, seemed to offer a path, a desperate final gamble. I couldn't go back. The screaming sacks, the birthed horrors were still below. I had to go forward. I strained my eyes, trying to make out details in the gloom. The abyss between me and the platform seemed impossibly wide, easily 50 feet, maybe more. Too far to jump, too far to climb. There was no visible bridge, no connecting structure, just empty air. The entity on the platform was still. Its faint silhouette seemed smaller, more vulnerable now. The low moan of the tower continued, a sound of deep structural anguish. I had to get to that platform. I had to confront it. But how? I looked down at the last calcified step I was on. It felt solid, surprisingly so, given its crumbling appearance. My boots were on the edge of the precipice, the abyss stretching out before me. And then something caught my eye, a faint shimmer, almost imperceptible in the darkness just above the void. It was like a disturbance in the air, a heat haze stretching out from my ledge towards the platform. It was familiar, the same shimmer I had seen around the nascent calcified growths during my previous ascent. Could it be, was the tower, even in its wounded state, still trying to form a bridge? Or was it an ancient, inherent part of its structure, a desperate attempt to connect? I cautiously extended my hand into the shimmering space. My fingers met nothing, no solid surface, but I felt something, a faint, cold hum, a resonance that vibrated through his fingertips, almost imperceptible, like the whisper of air through a spider web. It was there, something was there, an invisible vibrational pathway. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this a bridge, a new trap, or a desperate response from the wounded tower attempting to reconnect its broken pieces? Whatever it was the only way forward. The horrors of the lower levels, the chittering, scuttling spawn were still below, slowly but surely making their way up. Retreat was not an option. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the acrid tang of burnt matter still clinging to the air. My camping knife was still clutched in my other hand, a cold, hard comfort. It felt pathetic against the scale of this entity, this living structure, but it was all I had. With agonizing slowness, I stretched my leg forward, testing the invisible threshold. My boot met nothing solid, yet as I pushed further, I felt that faint, cold hum intensify, almost like a subtle resistance, a field of force pushing back. It felt like stepping into thick, invisible syrup or a current of intensely cold air. The shimmer around my boot, though unseen in the total darkness, was palpable now, a buzzing numbness that prickled my skin, similar to when I'd first stepped on the nascent calcified growths. This wasn't a solid bridge, it was forming, or rather it was attempting to form. The flare had disrupted the tower's ability to manifest physically, but its inherent desire to connect, to complete itself, was still active. It was trying to bridge the gap using raw, unrefined energy, a desperate, instinctual response from a wounded beast. And just like the nascent steps, it was drawing on my presence, my intent, my very life force to solidify its existence. Every step was an act of profound dread. I could feel the cold hum intensifying with each millimeter I advanced, a subtle pull, a creeping numbness that was more insidious than pain. It felt like I was wading through a powerful, unseen current that threatened to drag me down into the abyss. The faint glow from the platform ahead was my only guide, my only anchor in the crushing darkness. It seemed to pulse now, a slow, rhythmic beat like a dying heart. The entity, its silhouette visible against that faint light, remained motionless, its cracked form outlined in the phosphorescence. It was watching, waiting. It was too wounded to actively attack, but it was still trying to consume, to absorb. I took the first terrifying step off the precipice. My leg dangled for a moment in the empty air, then my boot made contact with the invisible, humming bridge. It yielded slightly, a gelatinous, non-existent resistance that still managed to sap my strength, to drain a little more of my precious energy. The cold numbness spread up my leg, a creeping chill that penetrated through my clothes, seeping into my very bones. My entire body tensed, my muscles screamed. The abyss yawned beneath me, an absolute, terrifying void. I could hear nothing but the frantic beat of my own heart, the low, pained moan of the tower, and the faint, unsettling hum of the forming bridge. One foot, then the other. It was an agonizing, inch-by-inch shuffle across nothingness. Each step felt like a leap of faith, a gamble against the vast, hungry emptiness. I kept my eyes fixed on the distant, struggling glow of the entity, my last remaining weapon, my raw defiance burning in my soul. The air grew progressively colder as I moved further out into the chasm. The faint smell of burnt copper lingered, but now it was joined by a new, more profound scent. The sterile, ancient smell of raw stone, of geological time, mingled with something metallic and almost electrical, like the ozone after a lightning strike. The bridge pulsed around me, a silent, ravenous maw attempting to drink me in. I was perhaps a third of the way across when the first subtle shift occurred. The hum beneath my feet intensified, growing into a low, resonant vibration that threatened to shake me from my tenuous footing. The invisible surface, which had been subtly yielding, now felt as if it were hardening, calcifying around my boots. It wasn't supporting me, it was binding me. Panic flared, sharp and cold. This wasn't just a passive absorption, it was an active process. The tower, even wounded, was still trying to complete its cycle, to turn me into another part of its grotesque structure. I tried to speed up, to pull my feet free, but the resistance was stronger now. The bridge had begun to solidify around my boots, a cold, unyielding grip. I felt a terrifying sensation, as if my feet were slowly being encased in a transparent, icy concrete. The entity on the platform stirred. Its head, previously tilted in apparent anguish, now straightened. The faint phosphorescence of the platform brightened slightly, and I saw the entity's form, though still cracked and dull, begin to pulse with a faint internal light like embers rekindling. Its violet eyes, though still absent, were replaced by a growing intensity in the general area of its head, as if drawing power from its recovering state. It was aware, it was reacting. My crossing was fueling its recovery. "No," I rasped, my voice hoarse, a desperate whisper in the vast emptiness. I tugged, I struggled, I tried to rip my feet free from the hardening, invisible grip, but it was too strong. My boots were becoming one with the bridge. In a desperate, adrenaline-fueled burst of defiance, I raised my camping knife. It was a flimsy, mundane tool against such a cosmic horror, but it was all I had. I brought it down, not on the invisible bridge, but on my own boot, sawing frantically at the laces, at the leather. If I couldn't move the bridge, I would abandon the boots. The leather was thick, tough, but my desperation gave me strength. I tore at it, grunting with effort, my fingers raw, my knuckles scraping against the semi-solid surface. The knife bit into the laces, severing them one by one. The cutting sound was amplified in the cavern's silence, a desperate, frantic tearing. The entity on the platform continued to pulse, its recovery accelerating. The glow intensified. I could almost feel its presence reaching out, a cold, hungry tendril of awareness. Finally, with a grunt, the last lace snapped. I pulled my foot free, leaving my boot and a small patch of my sock embedded in the hardening bridge. The cold numbness, previously confined to my foot, shot up my leg, an agonizing jolt, but I was free, one foot. I repeated the frantic process with the other boot, my heart hammering like a drum against my ribs. Time was running out. The entity was strengthening. The bridge was solidifying. It felt like an eternity, but within moments, my second boot was also severed, left behind as a silent, grim monument to my desperate struggle. I stood barefoot on the invisible bridge, the cold numbness now a full-body assault, but I was moving, and I was free. My bare feet, sensitive to every nuance, could feel the subtle vibrations of the bridge more acutely now. It was no longer a uniformly invisible surface. Faint, reddish lines, like the veins I had seen in the stone steps, began to appear within the transparent structure, pulsing faintly, spreading outwards from the embedded boots. The bridge was becoming visible, slowly, sickeningly, taking on the same organic, calcified properties as the steps below. My interaction, my struggle, my desperate act of abandoning my boots had merely accelerated its grotesque manifestation. I had to move, now. I scrambled forward, ignoring the cold, ignoring the pain, ignoring the growing revulsion. My bare feet slapped against the nascent bridge, each contact sending a jolt of icy numbness up my legs. The reddish veins glowed brighter with each step, the structure solidifying in my wake. It was like running across a vast, invisible membrane that was actively trying to consume me, to pull me into its living fabric. The last 20 feet were the most terrifying. The entity on the platform was now fully lit, its obsidian form radiating a dull, violet glow, though still marred by cracks. Its featureless head, though still without discernible eyes, seemed to focus its entire alien presence on me, and its arm, previously held in a position of struggle, now extended slowly, deliberately towards me. There was no physical force, but a mental one. A tendril of pure, chilling dread, a cold thought that pierced directly into my mind. Become complete. It was weaker than before, fractured by the flare's assault, but still potent, still terrifying. I fought back, raw instinct overriding logic. No, I screamed, a desperate, guttural roar. I won't be yours. I sprinted the last few steps, my bare feet burning with cold, my lungs aching, my mind a storm of defiance. The bridge solidified rapidly behind me, a network of pulsating reddish veins and hardening, transparent material. It was a race against time, a desperate dash to reach the platform before the bridge fully consumed me, before the entity fully recovered. With a final, desperate lunge, I flung myself onto the edge of the platform. I landed hard, sprawling on the smooth, polished stone. The impact sent a jarring shockwave through my body, but the sensation of solid ground beneath me was a profound relief. The cold, buzzing numbness of the bridge receded, replaced by the cool, hard surface of the platform. I pushed myself up, scrambling to my knees, then to my feet, knife still clutched in my hand. My legs trembled, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I was here. I had made it. The platform was massive, easily 50 feet in diameter, a vast, circular expanse of dark, ancient stone. Its surface glowed with a faint inner phosphorescence, illuminating the intricate carvings. But now, with my enhanced vision, I could see them more clearly. They weren't just carvings. They were bas-reliefs, subtly raised from the surface, depicting a terrifying narrative. Stylized humanoid figures, many of them unmistakably like myself, explorers, climbers, adventurers, were shown in various stages of being consumed by the spiral staircase. Some were entangled in its coils, their limbs becoming tendrils of stone. Others were embedded directly into the steps, their faces frozen in silent screams. And in the center of many of these depictions, a smaller, darker, more rudimentary version of the obsidian entity itself was shown, always at the apex of the tower, always overseeing the consumption. It was a history, a gruesome tapestry of all its victims. And in the very center of the platform, the carvings converged on a single gaping maw. A circular depression, perhaps 15 feet in diameter, pulsed with an unnerving, intensified version of the platform's phosphorescent glow. It was a well, a pit, leading down into unknown depths. Its edges were lined with what looked like ancient, intricate gears, carved directly into the stone, all turning inwards towards the maw. And from within, I could feel a faint, hot wind rising, smelling of raw earth and something faintly sweet, almost like hot metal. The entity stood at the opposite edge of the platform, perhaps 30 feet away. Its violet glow had dimmed considerably, its cracks were more pronounced, spiderwebbing across its obsidian form. It seemed to shiver, a subtle vibration running through its entire being. Its arm, still extended, dropped slowly, its skeletal fingers twitching. It was wounded deeply, but it was still here, still a threat. The low moan of the tower continued, a constant, pervasive sound of deep structural distress. The cavern, previously a terrifying void, now felt like the interior of a vast, wounded animal, its breath a slow, painful exhalation. I gripped my knife, my knuckles white. This was it, the final confrontation. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice raw, echoing in the vast chamber. My words felt small, insignificant against the ancient power of the entity, but I needed to speak, to assert my presence, my will. The entity remained silent, its featureless head turned slowly, not towards me, but towards the gaping maw in the center of the platform. Its body seemed to draw in on itself, to contract, as if in pain. Then from the maw a low, guttural growl rose, a sound of immense, unfathomable hunger. The carvings on the platform, especially those depicting the consumed figures, seemed to pulse, their agony momentarily animated by the maw's deep resonance. A new, terrifying thought dawned on me. The entity wasn't just the keeper of the staircase. It was connected to it. It was the staircase, or at least an integral part of its functioning, and the maw was its mouth, its stomach. The obsidian entity began to move again, slowly, painfully, towards the central maw. Its movements were not the graceful glide of before, but a staggered shuffle, a wounded limp. It seemed to be drawn towards the pit, an inexorable, almost ritualistic movement. I watched, frozen in place, my knife held ready. What was it doing? Was it retreating, regenerating, or was it feeding? As it drew closer to the maw, the faint, internal violet glow that still flickered within its cracks intensified, a last, desperate surge of energy. The air around it crackled with a palpable, unseen force. And then from within the maw, something began to rise. Slowly, sickeningly, a dark, viscous liquid began to well up from the depths of the pit. It was thick, almost tar-like, and pulsed with a faint, reddish luminescence from within its depths. It smelled of copper and cloying sweetness, the very same smell I had encountered near the calcified growths near the sacks. It was the lifeblood of the tower, its sustenance, its very essence. The obsidian entity reached the edge of the maw. It paused, its featureless head now directly above the rising, pulsating fluid. Its cracked form began to glow more intensely, the violet light momentarily pushing back against the dullness. And then it slowly, deliberately lowered itself into the rising, dark fluid. It wasn't a dive or a jump. It was a descent, a slow, agonizing immersion. As its body touched the viscous surface, the fluid rippled, sending out concentric waves of reddish light. The obsidian form seemed to sink not into the liquid but through it as if it were a permeable membrane. As it sank, the cracks in its form seemed to heal. The violet light intensified, smoothing over the fractured surface, filling the hairline fissures. Its movements became less pained, more deliberate. It was regenerating, feeding, drawing power from the very essence of the tower, and the more it consumed, the stronger it became. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This was its lair, its source of power. If it fully regenerated, I was doomed. The flare had only bought me a temporary reprieve. I couldn't let it happen. With a roar of pure desperation, I charged. My bare feet pounded against the polished stone of the platform, the sound echoing in the vast cavern. My knife, clutched in my hand, was aimed at its exposed form. The entity, sensing my charge, lifted its head from the fluid. Its form was already visibly smoother, the cracks fading. And in the space where its eyes should be, two pinpricks of intense, burning violet light reappeared, growing brighter, more focused, fixed directly on me. It was no longer in anguish. It was regaining its power. As I closed the distance, the maw in the center of the platform seemed to react, its glowing depths churning. The dark, viscous fluid pulsed faster, and a low, resonant thrum emanated from its depths, resonating through the entire platform, vibrating up through my feet into my very core. I was perhaps 10 feet away when the first effect hit. It wasn't physical, it was mental. A wave of pure, unadulterated exhaustion slammed into me. Not just physical weariness, but a soul-deep fatigue that threatened to drop me to my knees. My muscles screamed, my mind screamed louder. Every climb, every terror, every desperate moment of the last few whatever hours, days, weeks seemed to hit me at once. My pace faltered, my knife arm dropped slightly. Futility, despair, sleep. The whispers, no longer chittering, but cold, clear, and ancient, filled my mind, a seductive promise of oblivion. I stumbled, fought against it. No, I gasped, forcing the word out, forcing my legs to move. Not yet. I pushed through the exhaustion, through the crushing weight of futility. My target was just ahead. The entity, its form still partially submerged in the glowing fluid, its violet eyes burning, was waiting. 5 feet. As I closed in, the maw responded again. The intricate, carved gears around its rim began to glow with a faint, phosphorescent light, and I could hear a subtle, almost imperceptible click-whir sound, like ancient mechanisms engaging. The dark fluid in the maw began to churn more violently, sucking inwards. And then, just as I raised my knife for a desperate strike, the entire platform began to tilt. It wasn't a gentle sway. It was a rapid, sickening lurch, a sudden, violent shift that sent me sprawling forward, tumbling towards the maw. The polished stone, slick with a faint residue from the churning fluid, offered no purchase. I scrabbled, clawed, my bare hands tearing at the smooth stone. My knife clattered away, sliding towards the edge of the pit. The entity, still partially submerged, seemed unaffected, its violet eyes fixed on my descent, a cold, alien satisfaction radiating from its form. The maw, it was gaping open, the dark, reddish fluid churning violently, drawing me in. The smell of copper and decay was overwhelming, a hot, nauseating blast. My fingers brushed against the knife, but it was too far. I was sliding inexorably towards the edge. The ancient gears around the maw glowed brighter, their clicking and whirring intensifying. This was the end, consumed, assimilated, just like the figures in the carvings. No, not like this. A last desperate surge of adrenaline. With a primal scream, I slammed my hand down, not on the slick surface of the platform, but on one of the glowing, carved gears at the maw's rim. My fingers found purchase in the grooves, a desperate last-ditch grip. The gear, warm and pulsing with internal light, felt rough, ancient, yet strangely responsive to my touch. It wasn't just a carving, it was a mechanism. And as I gripped it, pulling myself back, digging my fingers into its grooves, I felt a familiar sensation. The cold hum, the subtle vibration, the nascent forming energy. This gear, like the bridge, was drawing on my interaction. A new idea, desperate and insane, sparked in my mind. What if the flare hadn't just wounded the entity, but had disrupted its control over the tower's mechanisms? What if these gears, these ancient parts of the tower's engine, could be manipulated? I clung to the gear, ignoring the pain in my tearing fingers, ignoring the exhaustion, ignoring the sickening tilt of the platform. I pushed. With all my remaining strength, I tried to turn the gear. It resisted immensely. The stone was ancient, immovable. But as I pushed, that familiar hum intensified, radiating from the gear through my hand up my arm. My body screamed, but my will screamed louder. The entity on the platform let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure, alien fury. Its violet eyes burned with renewed intensity, its form fully restored, its cracks gone. It was no longer regenerating. It was fighting back. A new wave of mental pressure hit me, more potent than before. Not just exhaustion, but despair, terror, madness. Images of my loved ones, distorted, screaming in agony, flashed through my mind. Whispers of my greatest failures, my deepest fears, amplified to a deafening roar. I screamed, a visceral, primal sound of pain and defiance, but I didn't let go of the gear. I pushed harder. I focused every last shred of my being on that one desperate act. And then, with an immense, grinding crack, the gear moved. It wasn't a smooth rotation. It was a violent, shuddering shift, a sound of immense, ancient stone tearing itself apart. The entire platform groaned, the sound of titanic forces at work. The maw in the center of the platform seemed to recoil, the dark fluid surging, then receding violently. And the platform, which had been tilting towards the maw, suddenly snapped back, then lurched violently in the opposite direction. I was flung backwards, away from the maw, sent skidding across the polished stone until I slammed into the outer edge of the platform, my back hitting the cold, hard stone with a painful impact. My head cracked against the surface, sending stars exploding behind my eyes. I lay there, dazed, gasping for breath, the world spinning around me. The mental assault from the entity had momentarily receded, replaced by a wave of pure, alien shock and rage. I pushed myself up, my vision blurry, my body screaming in protest. The platform was no longer stable. It was wobbling, trembling violently, a deep, continuous tremor running through its very core. The maw in the center was still, the dark fluid receding back into the depths, its phosphorescent glow dimming erratically. The carved gears around its rim were now fractured, scarred, several of them visibly broken, their intricate mechanisms shattered. The obsidian entity stood at the opposite edge of the platform, its violet eyes burning with a furious intensity. Its form, previously restored, now had new cracks appearing, spiderwebbing across its surface, deeper and more pronounced than before. It wasn't just wounded, it was damaged. My interference, my manipulation of the gears, had directly impacted its connection to the tower, its source of power. It began to move towards me, not with its usual glide, but with a stiff, jerky gait like a broken automaton. Its rage was palpable, a tangible wave of malice that crashed over me. I scrambled backwards away from its approach. My hand, still throbbing from the impact, closed around something cold and metallic. My knife. It had skittered across the platform and stopped just within reach. I gripped it, my last weapon, my last hope. The platform continued to shudder, its tremors growing more violent. Dust and small pebbles began to rain down from the vast ceiling of the cavern, which was still shrouded in impenetrable darkness. The low moan of the tower intensified, a sound of profound structural agony, as if its very foundations were being ripped apart. The entity advanced, its form glowing erratically, its violet eyes flaring. It was close now, perhaps 15 feet away. It lifted its arm, its skeletal fingers twitching, preparing for another mental assault or perhaps something more. I didn't wait. With a desperate, animalistic roar, I lunged forward, not at the entity, but past it, towards the now wobbling edge of the platform where the nascent bridge had solidified. The entity seemed momentarily caught off guard by my unexpected move. Its mental assault faltered, a wave of confusion washing over me before the rage returned. I reached the edge of the platform. The bridge, previously invisible, was now a visible, reddish-veined structure, hardening, calcifying, but also visibly cracking under the platform's violent tremors. It was still connected, but it was unstable. I didn't hesitate. I jumped, not back onto the bridge, but off the platform into the darkness of the chasm, aiming for the nearest visible fissure in the tower wall below. It was madness. It was suicide, but staying on the platform, facing the enraged, regenerating entity felt like a slower, more certain death. I fell. The air rushed past me, cold and unforgiving. The cavern was immense, vast, and the darkness absolute, broken only by the rapidly receding, flickering light of the damaged platform above. I could hear the entity's shriek of pure, unadulterated fury echoing above me, quickly fading into the roar of the rushing air. My hands scrabbled, clawed, searching for purchase on the unseen wall. My legs dangled uselessly. I was falling. And then, with a jarring impact, my body slammed into something. Not the soft earth of the bottom, not the hard stone of the tower, but something yielding, yet firm. I tumbled, rolled, my body screaming in protest, but I wasn't falling into an abyss. I had landed on something, a ledge, a path. Dazed, disoriented, I lay there, gasping for air. The impact had knocked the wind out of me. My head throbbed, my limbs ached, but I was alive, and I was no longer falling. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up. My vision was still blurry, but I could make out shapes in the pervasive gloom. The air around me was still, cold, and silent, save for the distant, fading groan of the tower from somewhere above. I was on a narrow ledge, a path carved directly into the inner wall of the cavern, perhaps 20 feet below the platform. It was made of the same dark, ancient stone as the tower, but its surface was uneven, rough, almost like rough-hewn rock, rather than the polished surface of the platform. I looked up. The platform was a distant, flickering light above me, its tremors now less violent but still present. I couldn't see the entity, but I could feel its lingering presence, a vast, wounded rage that resonated through the very stone beneath me. I looked down. Below the ledge. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see the bottom of the cavern, but I could hear something. A faint, distant sound. The chittering, the scuttling, the keening. The nascent horrors from below were still rising. I was trapped on a narrow path, suspended between a wounded, enraged entity above and an army of grotesque offspring below. I needed light. My backpack was still on, miraculously strapped tightly to my back. My fingers fumbled, searching for anything. My last flare was gone, used up in my desperate ascent. My headlamps, my phone, all dead. But I had something else, my multi-tool. It had a small, almost useless LED light. It was barely more than a toy, meant for finding keys in the dark, not navigating a cosmic horror. But it was light, any light. With trembling fingers, I found the switch and pressed it. A tiny, faint beam, a mere pinprick of white light, pierced the surrounding gloom. It was weak, pathetic, but it was enough to see the immediate path ahead. The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough for me to walk comfortably, and it curved with the inner wall of the cavern leading off into the darkness. It wasn't a staircase. It was a single, winding path, a precarious traverse. And as the faint light played across the rough stone, I saw something. Markings, carvings similar to those on the platform, but cruder, more ancient, etched directly into the rock face. I brought the faint beam closer. There were glyphs, symbols, pictograms, and among them images of humanoid figures not being consumed by the staircase but escaping it. Climbing down, sometimes with ropes, sometimes with crude tools, and always leading to a single, consistent symbol, a downward pointing arrow terminating in a crude, stylized depiction of an eye. An eye. My breath hitched. This wasn't a death trap, it was a map, a desperate message left by previous victims, not of the entity, but for the entity. Or perhaps for those who came after. This path, this secret ledge, it was a way out, a way to escape the entity, to avoid the eternal cycle of the staircase. But it led down, deeper into the tower, and towards that stylized eye. The chittering sounds from below grew louder, closer. The echoes in the cavern intensified them, making them sound like an approaching swarm. They were coming for me. I had to move. I had to follow the map. With a profound sense of newfound purpose, I began to walk, my multi-tool's weak beam cutting a pathetic but precious swath through the gloom. The path was treacherous, uneven, occasionally slick with dampness, but it was solid. And it was leading me away from the platform, away from the wounded, enraged entity. The carvings continued, providing a silent, ancient narrative. They showed the figures navigating narrow passages, sometimes encountering smaller insectal creatures similar to those from the sacks, but dispatching them with crude weapons. Other carvings showed them interacting with the environment, triggering unseen mechanisms, opening hidden passages. It was a chronicle of survival, a guide for escape. The further I walked, the more the cold, oppressive silence of the cavern returned. The moaning of the tower, the distant shriek of the entity, began to fade, replaced by the soft, rhythmic drip of water and the subtle internal hum of the tower, a constant, low vibration that was almost soothing after the recent chaos. The path began to descend, a very gradual slope downwards, winding along the curved wall. I could feel the air growing warmer, more humid, and the smell of damp earth and ancient stone became more pronounced. I walked for what felt like hours, guided only by the feeble beam of my multi-tool and the cryptic carvings. My mind, still reeling from the trauma of the platform, slowly began to regain some semblance of clarity. I was no longer fighting a hopeless loop. I was on a true path, a desperate escape route. The carvings eventually depicted a series of wider, more stable ledges, some of them with strange, circular depressions that seemed to hold remnants of burnt material. Fires, perhaps those who came before me had stopped, built fires, rested here. The thought of companionship, even across millennia, brought a flicker of warmth to my heart. The path widened considerably, becoming a proper tunnel, still curving downwards, but now with a high, vaulted ceiling that occasionally glistened with condensation. The carvings grew more detailed, almost three-dimensional, depicting not just escape, but also what looked like offerings at the stylized eye. Small, sacrificed objects laid before it. What was this eye? A deity, a mechanism, a place of true exit. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and something faintly sweet like decaying flowers, but intertwined with a metallic tang like old blood. This wasn't the same sweet decay of the sacs, it was something else, more profound, more ancient. And then, just ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast, circular chamber. My multi-tool light, weak as it was, struggled to illuminate the immense space. But what it revealed sent a fresh wave of awe and terror through me. The chamber was colossal, far larger than the cavern above. Its ceiling was lost in darkness, but its walls, curving outwards, were covered in intricate, spiraling patterns, pulsating faintly with a soft, bioluminescent glow. It was like looking into the heart of a cosmic flower or a vast, living engine. And in the center of the chamber, supported by immense stone pillars that rose from the darkness below, was a single, colossal, perfectly spherical object. It was immense, easily 100 feet in diameter, and made of the same dark, ancient stone as the tower. Its surface was perfectly smooth, polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the faint bioluminescence of the walls in 1,000 tiny facets. And on its surface, etched with impossible precision, was the symbol from the carvings, the eye. Not a crude pictogram this time, a hyper-realistic, impossibly detailed carving of an eye. It was closed, its lids heavy, its surface smooth, but it was undeniably an eye. And it was vast, spanning perhaps 30 feet across the sphere, its lid lines so detailed, so lifelike, that it seemed as though it might open at any moment. I stood there transfixed, my multi-tool light beam trembling in my hand. This was it. This was the eye, the culmination of the escape path. The air in the chamber was utterly still, cold and heavy, pregnant with a profound, ancient energy. The low hum of the tower, which had been a subtle background presence, intensified here, resonating through the very air, vibrating in my teeth. It felt like standing in the presence of something truly ancient, truly powerful, something that predated human understanding. The carved eye was not just a carving, it pulsed. a faint, rhythmic beat deep within the sphere, making the polished stones subtly expand and contract, an almost imperceptible breath. It was alive or dormant. And around the base of the sphere, where it met the pillars, were countless smaller carvings, not figures but objects. Offerings, tools, ancient weapons, personal effects, even what looked like petrified bones, all laid before the colossal eye, silent testaments to those who had come before, those who had followed the map. What had they hoped to achieve? What did the eye do? Did it grant passage? Did it offer release? Or was it merely another, grander form of consumption? I took a tentative step into the chamber. The sound of my bare feet on the stone echoed eerily in the vast space. The bioluminescent walls pulsed, and the eye seemed to deepen its slow, rhythmic breath. I looked back at the tunnel, the last escape carving still visible in the dim light, the downward arrow terminating at the eye, my way forward. I approached the sphere, drawn by an irresistible ancient pull. Its surface was cold to the touch, smooth as glass. I traced the outline of the eye, my fingers following the impossibly delicate lines of its closed lids. It felt dormant. I traced the outline of the eye, my fingers following the impossibly delicate lines of its closed lids. It felt dormant, like a massive creature in a deep ancient slumber. The stone was cool beneath my touch, smooth and unyielding, yet I could feel the faint, rhythmic pulse emanating from deep within it, a slow, steady beat like a sleeping heart. It resonated through my fingertips, up my arm, and into my chest, a profound, unsettling vibration. The bioluminescent patterns on the chamber walls seemed to intensify their glow slightly, casting longer, wavering shadows across the vast space. The hum of the tower, which had been subtle, now vibrated more strongly, a constant, low thrum that filled the air, the stone, and my very bones. It felt like the entire structure was holding its breath, waiting. I pulled my hand away, a strange, tingling sensation lingering on my skin. The eye hadn't opened. Nothing dramatic had happened. Yet the sense of immense, latent power radiating from it was palpable, almost suffocating. I looked down at the base of the sphere, at the offerings left by those who came before. Petrified bones, ancient tools, what looked like a rusted compass, a small, intricate pendant, all turned to stone, solidified over millennia, resting on the cold floor around the colossal pillars that supported the eye. They were offerings, yes, but to what end? Had they found release? Or had their offerings merely paved the way for their own assimilation into this structure? The thought sent a chill down my spine. My multi-tool light, a feeble beacon against the vastness, flickered, a tiny, annoying reminder of its limitations. I needed to understand. I needed to know what to do. The carvings had led me here, but the final step was still unclear. I scanned the walls again, my gaze sweeping across the glowing, spiraling patterns. They were beautiful in a horrifying way, intricate and alien, like the internal organs of some colossal living thing. And then I noticed it. Near the entrance to the chamber, where the escape tunnel met the main cavern, there was a break in the pattern, a single large carving different from the others. I moved towards it, my bare feet echoing softly on the cold stone. As I got closer, the carving resolved into a series of images, a final, crucial set of instructions. It depicted a humanoid figure, very similar to the ones escaping the staircase, standing before the colossal eye. The figure was holding an object, a specific kind of offering. It wasn't one of the mundane tools or personal effects I'd seen below. This object glowed faintly in the carving, emanating lines of energy. And above the figure's head, the carved eye was shown, open, with light streaming from it, illuminating a path into a starry void. A light source, a powerful one, that was the key. My mind raced. My emergency flare was gone, used to wound the entity. My tactical flashlight, my headlamp, my phone, all dead or lost in previous resets. What did I have that could produce a powerful, focused light? I fumbled with my multi-tool, checking its small compartments. My camping knife was still in my hand, a cold comfort. I ran through my remaining items, a tattered map useless in this place, a half-eaten energy bar squashed and unappetizing, a small, empty water bottle, nothing that could generate significant light. Despair began to creep in, cold and insidious. Had I come all this way, faced down so much terror, only to be stopped by the lack of a simple light source? The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. The chittering sounds from below, though still distant, seemed to grow subtly louder, a constant, irritating reminder of the horrors that pursued me. I couldn't stay here forever. I looked at my multi-tool, its tiny LED beam struggling against the gloom. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. I needed something more, something that could emulate the glowing object in the carving. I thought about the entity, about the tower itself. The bioluminescent walls here, the internal phosphorescence of the platform above, the violet glow of the entity light was central to this place. It was both a weapon and a source of power. Could I create light? My mind went back to the flare, its intense heat, its blinding light. It had hurt the entity, broken its control. The entity was the tower, or at least intimately connected to its mechanisms. And the eye was clearly a mechanism of the tower too. A specific frequency of light, a specific kind of energy. I looked around the chamber, my multi-tool beam dancing across the ancient stone. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls, could they be a source, a faint energy source? I pressed my hand against one of the glowing patterns. It was cool, smooth, and pulsed gently. It was clearly biological, or at least bioengineered. The light was beautiful, but soft, not intense enough. I needed something to focus it, to amplify it, or I needed a different kind of light. I walked back to the offerings at the base of the eye. I looked closer at the petrified tools. What were they? Were they simply sacrifices, or had they been used in some way? Many were simple tools, axes, hammers, picks, all calcified, but one caught my eye. It was a long, thin, almost needle-like object, intricately carved, made of the same dark stone as the eye itself. It was broken at one end, but the other end tapered to a sharp point. And along its shaft, faint, almost imperceptible lines of reddish luminescence pulsed, matching the internal glow I'd seen in the bridge and the fluid in the maw. It wasn't just a tool, it was a conduit. My heart quickened. This was different. This looked like it had been specifically designed to interact with the tower's energy. I knelt, reaching for it. As my bare fingers touched its cold, smooth surface, the reddish glow along its shaft brightened momentarily, a faint echo of the power it once held. It was ancient, brittle, but still contained a spark. I carefully picked it up. It was longer than my forearm, about 20 inches, and surprisingly light. The broken end showed a clean fracture, as if it had snapped under immense stress. The intact end tapered to a sharp point, almost like a crystal shard. This wasn't my light source, but it was something more than a crude weapon or a desperate cry for help. It felt like a piece of the tower itself, separated and dormant, but still connected. The carving had shown an object glowing. Could this tool, this conduit, be made to glow again? If it was meant to channel the tower's energy, perhaps it could channel the bioluminescent light from the walls or even my own life force into a focused beam. It was a wild theory born of exhaustion and desperation, but it was the only one I had. I gripped the stone conduit in my hand. Its coldness seeped into my palm, but there was also a faint internal warmth, a barely perceptible thrum. I looked at the nearest bioluminescent pattern on the wall, a swirling vortex of soft light. I pressed the pointed end of the conduit against the glowing pattern. Nothing happened immediately. The soft light merely diffused around the point. I pressed harder, pouring my intent, my desperate will into the act. My muscles tensed, my jaw clenched. I imagined drawing the energy, focusing it. Then a faint, almost imperceptible change. The bioluminescent pattern where I pressed the conduit seemed to dim slightly, its light draining away, flowing into the stone needle. And along the conduit's shaft, the reddish lines brightened, pulsating with renewed vigor, as if drinking from the wall. It was working, slowly, very slowly. The process was agonizingly gradual. The bioluminescent patterns were vast, but their energy seemed diffuse, spread thin. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a leaky eyedropper. The light from the wall flowed into the conduit, empowering the dormant reddish veins within, making them glow with a deeper, more vibrant hue. I moved the conduit, tracing patterns on the wall, trying to find areas of higher concentration. Some spots were brighter, more potent, and the conduit absorbed their light more readily, its internal glow intensifying with each successful connection. It was a race against time, a desperate act of gathering power from the very structure that had imprisoned me. As I continued, moving from one bioluminescent patch to another, drawing in their stored energy, a new sensation began to spread through my body. The cold numbness, which had receded after I reached the platform, started to return, subtle at first, then growing more pronounced. It was as if drawing energy from the tower's walls was also drawing something from me, a trade-off, a subtle draining of my own vital force. My head began to ache, my muscles felt heavy, my movements sluggish. The exhaustion, previously a mental assault from the entity, now felt like a physical reality seeping into my bones. The more the conduit glowed, the weaker I felt. But the conduit was transforming. The reddish veins along its shaft were no longer faint. They were pulsing with a steady inner fire, growing brighter, more intense, until the entire object hummed with a soft, warm light. It wasn't blinding, not yet, but it was a clear, focused beam emanating from the sharpened tip. It was exactly like the glowing object in the carving. I had done it. I had created my offering. But at what cost? I swayed, feeling lightheaded, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. My multi-tool light finally flickered and died, leaving only the soft glow of the conduit and the ambient bioluminescence of the chamber. The chittering sounds from below were definitely closer now, an unsettling symphony of tiny, clicking legs and hungry whispers. They were nearing the escape tunnel. I was running out of time. I clutched the glowing conduit, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold numbness that now permeated my body. I walked, stumbled towards the colossal eye, its immense, closed lid dominating the chamber. My bare feet scraped on the stone floor. The offers of those who came before seemed to silently observe my approach. Their sacrifice, their wisdom had led me here. But my own sacrifice, my own dwindling life force was fueling this final act. I stood before the eye, its closed lid now just a few feet away, looming over me like a sleeping god. The hum from within the sphere intensified, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor, through the air, and into my very soul. The eye pulsed, its breath deepening, as if sensing my presence, sensing the activated conduit in my hand. I raised the conduit, its glowing tip aimed directly at the center of the eye's closed lid. The light emanating from its point was now a steady, focused beam, a vibrant reddish-violet hue. It wasn't as blinding as the flare, but it was potent, concentrated. As the light from the conduit touched the eye's surface, a profound tremor ran through the entire chamber. Not a destructive tremor like the platform, but a deep, resonant vibration, a shift in ancient energies. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls flared, then dimmed, as if the chamber itself was drawing a breath. The polished stone surface of the eye where the light landed began to shimmer, not a heat haze, but an ethereal, almost liquid distortion. The intricate lines of the closed lid seemed to soften, to blur, as if they were melting. Then slowly, agonizingly slowly, the colossal eye began to open. It wasn't a sudden snap, it was a gradual, majestic unfurling. The heavy, sculpted lids, which had seemed so solid and immutable, began to retract, peeling back with a sound like ancient stone grinding against itself, a low, resonant groan that filled the entire chamber. As the lids separated, revealing the orb within, a deep indigo light began to stream forth. It was soft, mesmerizing, yet held an immense power. It wasn't the harsh, destructive violet of the entity above, but a deeper, more profound hue imbued with an ancient wisdom. The sphere rumbled, its internal hum intensifying into a sonorous chord that resonated through every fiber of my being. The bioluminescent walls dimmed almost completely, as if all the chamber's energy was now flowing into the eye. And then it was fully open. The eye was immense, a colossal orb of shimmering indigo set within the dark, polished stone. Its surface was not crystalline, but an endlessly swirling vortex of liquid light, an ocean of starlight contained within the chamber. There was no iris, no pupil, just an infinite depth of indigo drawing me in. And within that depth, faint, distant pinpricks of light began to appear, growing brighter, resolving into what looked like distant stars or perhaps entire galaxies. It was a window, a portal, a gateway to somewhere else. A profound sense of awe, unlike anything I had ever experienced, washed over me. This wasn't a trap, this wasn't consumption, this was a pathway, an escape. The indigo light streamed forth, washing over me, cool and strangely comforting. It permeated my being, pushing back against the cold numbness, the exhaustion, the lingering terror. It felt like a cleansing, a purification. The chittering sounds from the tunnel, which had grown ominously close, suddenly stopped. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the chamber, broken only by the majestic hum of the open eye. I turned my head, my eyes adjusting to the indigo light. I could faintly see the tunnel entrance. And silhouetted against its darkness, frozen in place, was a horde of the insectal creatures, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the indigo light with terrified, stunned stillness. They hadn't advanced into the chamber, they were paralyzed. The eye's light was a barrier, a defense. A surge of desperate hope, stronger than any I had felt before, flooded my chest. This was it, the true exit, the way out of this living hell. I looked back at the swirling indigo vortex. It beckoned, a silent promise of freedom. But as I took a step forward, a new sensation seized me. The conduit in my hand, which had glowed so brightly, suddenly began to dim, its reddish-violet light flickering, sputtering. The cold numbness that had been held at bay by the eye's indigo glow now rushed back, more potent than before. My legs buckled. The conduit had drawn too much from me, and now it was giving out. The immense eye, still wide open, still streaming its beautiful indigo light, seemed to pulse, its swirling depths momentarily faltering, as if its connection to me, its power source, was weakening. The profound hum it generated wavered, a subtle discordance entering its majestic chord. Panic flared. If the conduit failed, would the eye close? Would this final chance be lost? I squeezed the conduit, desperately trying to reignite its fading light, but it was spent. Its internal glow died completely, leaving it a dark, inert piece of stone once more. My only source of focused light was gone. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto my knees, gasping for air, the cold numbness now an agonizing full-body assault. My head pounded, my vision swam. I felt myself fading, losing consciousness. The journey, the fear, the constant fight, it was all catching up to me, rushing in now that my goal was within reach. The eye's indigo light, though still streaming, seemed to recede, to lose its power to sustain me. The grand hum it emitted began to diminish, its vibrant chords slowly unwinding. No, not yet. A faint but persistent memory of the carved message on the wall flashed through my mind. The figure, the glowing object, and then the open eye illuminating a path. But what else? What was the final step? I forced my eyes open, looking at the open eye, then back at the faint outline of the carved instruction on the wall, barely visible in the dimming ambient light of the chamber. I needed something else, something more. The image of the figure on the carving, standing before the open eye, seemed to reach out. The figure wasn't just holding the glowing object. Its hand was extended, reaching towards the light, towards the vortex. An offering, not just a light source, but a sacrifice, a final giving. My mind, though hazy, latched onto the idea. I had given my energy to the conduit. What else did I have? What could I offer? My multi-tool dead and useless. My camping knife, my only weapon, my only protection. It was still clutched in my trembling hand, a cold, hard comfort. Could it be a weapon, a symbol of survival, of defiance, of my very will to live? Was that what it wanted? The thought sent a jolt of grim resolve through my weary body. If this was the price of freedom, I would pay it. I pushed myself up slowly, painfully, onto one knee, then the other, my entire body screaming in protest. The indigo light from the eye continued to stream, but its power felt weaker, its promise of passage receding with my strength. The chittering at the tunnel entrance seemed to stir, their paralysis weakening with the eye's fading hum. I could hear faint, scuttling sounds now, a restless shuffling. They were coming back to life. I gripped the hilt of my camping knife. It was a plain, functional tool, not ornate, not magical, but it had saved my life countless times. It was a part of me, a symbol of my struggle, my will to survive. With a deep, shuddering breath, I raised the knife. I looked at its cold, steel blade, then at the swirling indigo depths of the open eye. This was it, my final offering. I pushed the knife forward, extending my arm towards the vortex of light. As the tip of the blade entered the stream of indigo, something extraordinary happened. The metal of the knife did not dissolve or melt. Instead, it began to glow. A brilliant, pure white light radiating from the blade pulsed with an immense, palpable energy. It wasn't the reddish violet of the conduit, nor the destructive flash of the flare. This was a clear, steady, powerful light, a beacon of immense purity. The white light from the knife clashed with the indigo light of the eye, creating a dazzling, kaleidoscopic burst of color around my hand. The hum of the eye, which had been fading, suddenly roared back to life, louder, more profound than ever, a majestic symphony that filled the entire chamber, vibrating through the stone, through the air, through my very soul. The chittering creatures at the tunnel entrance let out a collective, piercing shriek of pure agony and terror, their paralysis complete now, intensified by the powerful light. They recoiled, scrambling back into the darkness of the tunnel, their sounds rapidly fading into the distance. The eye, invigorated, pulsed with renewed power. The swirling indigo vortex deepened, its myriad distant stars growing brighter, resolving into clearer images of cosmic wonder. The path into the starry void was clearer now, more defined, a beckoning promise of true escape. The white light from the knife intensified, becoming almost blinding. It wasn't just reflecting the eye's light, it was generating its own, drawing on something within the steel, within my intent, within the very fabric of my being. But this too came at a cost. The white light, so pure and strong, was also consuming the knife. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, then more visibly, the steel blade began to shimmer, to distort, to dissolve. It wasn't melting, it was turning into pure light, evaporating into energy, flowing into the eye, into the portal. I could feel it, a subtle drawing, a pull, as if the eye was accepting my offering, absorbing the essence of my struggle, my will to live, embodied in this last, defiant tool. The cold numbness in my body receded completely, replaced by a profound sense of lightness, a feeling of being utterly emptied, yet filled with a strange, peaceful energy. My hand, holding the now rapidly diminishing handle of the knife, was shaking. The blade was almost gone, a brilliant white light where steel once was. The eye's vortex spun faster, brighter, drawing me in. This was the final choice, the ultimate sacrifice. To step through, to truly escape, I had to let go. Let go of my last connection to the world I knew, my last weapon, my last defense, to fully embrace the unknown. With a final, conscious act of will, I opened my hand. The last shimmering remnants of the knife, now just a pure white light, floated free, detaching from my grasp, and drifted gracefully into the swirling indigo depths of the eye. As the light of the knife was fully absorbed, the eye flared one last time, a blinding burst of pure, cleansing energy that swept through the chamber, illuminating every intricate bioluminescent pattern on the walls, every ancient pillar, every offering at its base. Then the light began to contract. The swirling indigo vortex, previously an infinitely deep window, started to narrow, to solidify, to change. It wasn't closing, it was becoming a tunnel of pure, condensed indigo light spiraling inwards, drawing me forward. The profound hum of the eye shifted, becoming a high-pitched, resonant whine, a sound of immense energy being channeled, focused. It was like the sound of an ancient engine spinning up to full power. I stood there utterly spent, but with a profound sense of purpose. My body was light, my mind clear. The weight of the tower, the fear, the endless cycle of torment, it was all gone, replaced by a strange, exhilarating emptiness, a quiet anticipation. The tunnel of light solidified before me, its edges crisp and defined, a pathway into the cosmic void. The distant stars within it seemed to surge forward, beckoning. I took a step, my bare foot, previously so raw and aching, felt nothing as it entered the shimmering indigo threshold. It was neither cold nor warm. It was nothing, pure energy. I took another step, then another. I was walking into the light, into the unknown. The chamber, the offerings, the fleeing creatures, the very concept of the tower, it all receded, shrinking behind me, dissolving into an indistinct memory as the light enveloped me. The sensation of movement was disorienting. It wasn't like walking or falling or flying. It was more like an unraveling, a reweaving. My very atoms felt stretched, elongated, then reformed, flowing through the tunnel of light. The cosmic sights within the indigo stream swirled around me, galaxies blooming and fading, nebulae expanding and contracting, a silent, breathtaking ballet of creation and destruction. I was no longer Liam, the explorer. I was pure consciousness, drifting through an impossible space, a silent observer of wonders beyond human comprehension. The fear, the pain, the exhaustion, they were all distant echoes, fading into the vastness of this new reality. How long did it last? Moments, millennia, time had no meaning here. I was a motes of dust in the cosmic wind, carried along by a current of pure, ancient energy. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the journey changed. The swirling indigo began to shift, to fracture, its ethereal beauty replaced by a dazzling explosion of colors. Reds, oranges, yellows, greens, a chaotic kaleidoscope that spun violently around me. The sensation of unraveling intensified, becoming almost painful, a tearing at the very fabric of my being. The profound hum of the eye, which had become a comforting presence, twisted into a screeching crescendo, a discordant cacophony that grated on my mind. The feeling of peaceful emptiness was replaced by an overwhelming sense of compression, as if I was being squeezed, crushed by an unimaginable force. The images of distant stars and galaxies blurred, then dissolved, replaced by a searing, blinding white light. It was everywhere, absolute, overwhelming, burning into my very consciousness. It felt like I was being reborn, or perhaps annihilated. My ears popped, the high-pitched whine shifted, changing pitch, frequency. Then, with a sudden, violent lurch, the light exploded outwards, dissipating. And I fell. It wasn't a gentle descent, it was a dizzying, head-over-heels tumble through cold, dark air. The chaotic colors and blinding white light were gone, replaced by a suffocating blackness. I felt gravity, solid and undeniable, pull me down. Panic flared. Was this another trap? Had I been cast into another abyss? My hands instinctively flailed out, searching for purchase for anything. My bare feet kicked uselessly. The air was cold, crisp, and smelled of a pine and something metallic like rain on rock. Then, with a bone-jarring impact, I hit something. Not stone, not water, something soft yet firm. I rolled, tumbled, the impact sending a fresh wave of pain through my already battered body. My head slammed against something unyielding. My vision, still swimming from the light, slowly began to clear. I was lying on a soft, damp surface. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps. My limbs ached, every muscle screaming in protest. But I was here. I was somewhere. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. The air was cool, fresh, and filled with the scent of damp earth and living foliage. No ozone, no sweet decay, no acrid copper. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and disbelief. I was lying in a shallow, muddy ditch. Above me, immense, ancient trees towered into the sky, their branches forming a dense canopy that filtered the light into dappled shadows. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of moss and fallen leaves. The sounds were different too. The gentle rustle of leaves in a faint breeze, the distant chirping of unseen birds, the soft drip of water from leaves. It was a forest, a real forest. Disbelief warred with a cautious, fragile hope. Had I truly escaped, was this the other side? I pushed myself up further, my body protesting with every movement. I was still barefoot, still wearing my tattered, mud-stained clothes, my backpack still miraculously strapped to my back. My multi-tool was gone, likely lost in the fall. My knife was gone, a sacrifice to the eye. I was defenseless, but I was outside. I looked up at the sky, trying to pierce through the dense canopy. I could only see faint patches of gray, indicating an overcast day. No massive caverns, no bioluminescent walls, no obsidian entities. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the clean, pine-scented air filling my lungs. It was real. This was real. A wave of overwhelming relief washed over me, so potent that my knees almost gave out again. I had made it. I had escaped. But where was I, and how far was I from civilization? I began to walk, my bare feet sinking slightly into the soft, muddy earth. Each step was painful, but the pain was a grounding presence, a reminder that I was real, that this was real. The trauma of the tower, of the endless staircase, still lingered, a phantom chill in my bones, but it was receding, pushed back by the undeniable reality of the forest around me. I walked for what felt like an eternity, my sense of direction utterly lost. The forest was dense, ancient, with no clear path or trail. The silence, broken only by natural sounds, was immense, almost oppressive after the constant hum and chittering of the tower. My stomach rumbled, a deep, painful ache. I was ravenously hungry and thirsty. The half-eaten energy bar in my backpack seemed like a distant dream. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything substantial in how long? Weeks? Months? My perception of time was shattered. I stumbled, my legs protesting, my body growing weaker. The euphoria of escape was slowly being replaced by the harsh realities of survival. I needed water, I needed food, I needed shelter, and I needed to know where I was. As the light in the forest began to dim, indicating the approach of evening, a new sound reached my ears. Faint at first, then growing steadily louder, the sound of rushing water, a river. Hope surged again, rekindling my flagging spirits. Water meant life, water meant a possible path. I pushed forward, ignoring the growing pain in my feet, the exhaustion in my muscles. The sound grew louder, more distinct, the roar of a powerful current. And then, through a break in the trees, I saw it. A massive river, wide and turbulent, its dark waters churning and frothing as it rushed past. It was an impressive sight, powerful and wild. And on the far bank, partially obscured by the fading light and the dense foliage, I could make out something else. Lights, faint, flickering lights, and shapes, structures, not natural ones, buildings. A town or a village, civilization. A profound, almost unbearable wave of emotion washed over me. Relief, joy, exhaustion, but also a flicker of apprehension. How long had I been gone? What would I find? I stood on the river bank, my bare feet cold in the damp earth, my eyes fixed on the distant lights. The roar of the river was deafening, a powerful barrier between me and the promise of safety. And then, from the depths of the river just offshore, something caught my eye. A faint shimmer in the turbulent water, almost imperceptible against the rapidly dimming light. It was like a disturbance in the current, a brief, fleeting distortion. A disturbance that was eerily familiar. My breath hitched, my heart leaped into my throat, a cold, icy dread seeping into my chest, chilling me to the bone. The shimmer, it was the same one I had seen around the nascent calcified growths in the tower, the same one I had felt around the forming bridge. It was faint, almost gone, but it was there. A subtle, cold hum that resonated through the water, through the very air, and into my terrified mind. The tower, it wasn't gone, not completely. A new, horrifying thought dawned on me, chilling me far more deeply than the cold river water. The eye hadn't been a door to another place. It had been a portal, yes, but not a portal away. It had been a portal through the very fabric of the tower, through its ancient mechanisms, releasing me back out into its world, its wider influence. The shimmer pulsed again, subtly, almost imperceptibly, in the churning water, and with it, a faint, almost subliminal whisper, resonating not in my mind, but in the very air around me, carried on the wind, mingled with the roar of the river. We are always part of you. The words, cold and ancient, were a death knell to my fragile hope of freedom. The tower was not just a place. It was a consciousness, a living, expanding entity, and I was now outside, but perhaps not truly free. I stood on the riverbank, paralyzed, staring at the unsettling shimmer in the water, at the distant, flickering lights of civilization. The forest, previously a symbol of escape, now felt like another, wider, more insidious form of prison. The sun had finally set, plunging the forest into a deep, oppressive gloom. The lights across the river seemed to beckon, a desperate, fading promise. But the chill of the river and the subtle, humming presence within its depths was a stark reminder of the true horror I had just escaped. Or had I? The world outside the tower was vast, but now it felt subtly wrong, tainted, changed, and I, Liam, was changed too, marked, a survivor, yes, but perhaps also a conduit, a part of its grander design. I had to get across the river, I had to reach those lights, I had to find out what had truly happened. But the thought of entering that water, of brushing against that invisible, humming presence, filled me with a primal, visceral terror. I was outside, but the battle was far from over. It had merely shifted to a new, terrifying stage. I stood on the riverbank, paralyzed.